Hello everyone, welcome to What If Naruto Got One Punch Man God's Powers and Became Cosmic Horror Villain Part 1. Before we start, please go support Zack-Oblivion for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some wrong he or she calling here because it's translated, so let me clear this. Naruto is a male in this story. Prologue. Gods, mortals. They are two sides of the same coin. Being so different, but at the same time so similar. Both can love, both can hate, both can be greedy and benevolent. But there is a difference that has always existed between the two. And that difference is free will. Mortals have free will, the ability to make their own decisions and learn from them. However, the gods do not have that luxury, they cannot have free will. This is because the gods are beings that have a fundamental role in the universe, a role that they must always fulfill no matter what, this for the good of all existence. But what would happen if a mortal, who has free will, was granted the power of a god? The answer is simple: he can use that enormous power as he wishes, without having anything limiting or restricting him. However, this can generate catastrophic consequences for all existence. Universe 183. Konoha, the village hidden among the leaves, one of the 5 great ninja villages of the country of fire, being famous for its great military power, being one of the most powerful villages that exist, without counting the great power of its respective kage. Through the streets of that village, a young teenager was walking with all the calm in the world, with a small smile on her face. The girl in question had black hair, tied in a ponytail, with some loose strands, which framed her beautiful face. Her eyes were a deep black color, similar to coal. Her skin was a light color, almost pale, which accentuated her natural beauty, despite her young age. The young woman's clothing consisted of a sleeveless black shirt with a high collar, black shorts, which reached her knees, having over it a kind of dark blue coat, as well as having long black stockings, which covered her thin legs, ending with blue shinobi sandals. This girl was Satsuki Uchiha, the last survivor of the almost extinct Uchiha clan, being loved and respected throughout her village. The young black-haired girl was currently on her way to visit her boyfriend, who was none other than Naruto Uzumaki. That young man who was hated by almost the entire village, all just for being the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. The hatred was such that several times mobs of villagers gathered to beat him, to the point where they left him half dead, curiously always being in a dead end. The last Uchiha's mind flashed through the memory of how her love for the young blonde boy began, how he had defeated her when she tried to escape from Konoha to go with the traitor Sannin, Orochimaru, in his quest for power to kill his older sister. He had defeated her using the chakra of that bijou, managing to return her to the village, where she would finally realize how much she meant to Naruto and his other friends. It was from that moment that she ended up falling in love with the blonde. But that didn't last long, since he ended up being banished from the village for the simple fact of causing her harm. This was a very hard blow for her, and it didn't help that the unbearable Sakura hit and insulted her beloved blonde for any idiocy, not to mention the fact that he was booed by all the villagers, who had somehow found out about that decision of the council. She didn't even have time to say goodbye to him. He had left the village before she could realize it. However, something strange had happened. Sometimes he felt as if time had moved too fast, since without realizing it, a couple of years had already passed and Naruto had returned to Konoha. As soon as she noticed his return, she didn't hesitate for a single second to go greet him and receive him. She didn't understand why he had returned or how, but she didn't care. They went to Ichiraku's stand, where they started talking, when Naruto had told him that he turned out to be the reincarnation of a kind of alien called Son Goku, now having a lot of power. Plus he had met several women during his exile, basically having a harem now. The latter had bothered Uchiha a little, but he decided to let it go, and in fact, he had taken advantage of it, declaring his feelings for the blonde and quickly joining his harem. That had been the best day of all. Not only had she gotten back the love of her life, but she had also confessed her love to him, and he had accepted her. From that day on, I felt like nothing could go wrong. But lately, Satsuki felt that something was not right. She couldn't say specifically what, but just looking at the surroundings of the village made her feel like that place, in reality, wasn't Konoha. One day, he started having horrible nightmares, but they weren't ordinary nightmares. These were too real. It felt like I was seeing something through someone else's eyes. And usually, the scene I saw was almost always the same: corpses everywhere, the whole village destroyed, blood everywhere. And in the distance, through the fog, I could see a small silhouette. It was clearly that of a short person, but I couldn't make out any recognizable features. But without a doubt, the worst of all was that one night, he had what could easily be the worst nightmare of his entire life. This was not so much because of what he saw, but rather because of what he felt. In that nightmare, he found himself in a large field of flowers, all of bright and beautiful colors, and above said field, a beautiful, sunny sky, without a single cloud. The smell of flowers could be easily felt in the air, along with a gentle breeze, giving the place an even more beautiful appearance. However, despite how beautiful the landscape looked, his body couldn't help but tremble like jelly. It was as if his own body was screaming for him to escape from that place. He felt like he was a little bunny, locked in a cage full of hungry lions. It was a feeling of pure terror, a terror he had never felt before in his entire life. There were no words to describe it. And the moment she looked in front of her, she had found her beloved Naruto, who had his back to her in that beautiful field of flowers. This had only increased that feeling of pure terror a lot. She didn't understand why, if it was just Naruto, her beloved blonde who would never hurt her. Right? She remembered how she had managed to move, reaching out to touch the blonde's shoulder, but the moment she was inches away from touching him, the nightmare ended and she woke up. Her body was covered in sweat, and she was shaking like a leaf. Without a doubt, it was something she would never be able to forget. She had never been so scared in her entire life. She had even started to sob in the solitude of her room, trying to make that horrible feeling go away with those tears. That nightmare, I had had it the night before. Not even 24 hours had passed. Satsuki quickly shook her head, pushing those thoughts out of her mind. Currently, she was not only going to visit her boyfriend just to see him, but also to ask him if he knew anything about those nightmares. "I'm sure they're nothing, maybe I'm just exaggerating all this," the Uchiha girl would say to herself, while having a small smile on her lips. Even though she wished that those nightmares were nothing more than that, simple unpleasant dreams, something inside her told her that everything was wrong, that something big was about to happen. With each step I took, I felt a great tension build in the air, which increased more and more with each passing second. Wait! Suddenly, the black-haired girl stopped walking, even though she was only a few houses away from her beloved blonde's home. She looked up, fixing her eyes on the night sky full of beautiful bright stars, along with a large full moon, which shone brightly. But despite how beautiful the night sky looked, Satsuki's eyes slowly opened, reflecting a mixture of fear and confusion. "Since when is it nighttime?" was the question that came from the Uchiha's trembling lips. It was supposedly just after 2 p.m., and the walk to her boyfriend's house took no more than 15 minutes. She didn't understand how it had suddenly become nighttime, and the fact that the tension seemed to have increased did nothing to calm the young woman down. At that, a horrible and terrifying chill ran through his body. He felt like a horrible cold was hitting the back of his neck, making all the hairs on his body stand up. He could feel his heart beating 1,000 times a second, even hearing it as if it were in his ears. Her most basic attempts went crazy, telling her that she had to get out of there, that something dangerous was stalking her. She quickly began to sweat from that horrible feeling, while she looked around in search of that thing that was watching her. She even activated her Sharingan, in an attempt to see better in the darkness of the night and find her enemy. However, this was of little use, as it seemed to have no effect. This fact only increased her growing fear and despair. The fact that her Sharingan did not work was also a blow to her pride. Her mind was not able to understand how her ocular power had stopped working from one second to the next. She knew that ninjas had to keep their emotions under control, since their missions always put them in life or death situations, but right now, all the training had gone out the window. She no longer felt like a strong and powerful kunoichi, but like a helpless child facing an unknown enemy. Plus, there was no one on the streets who could help her, and she was alone against whatever was stalking her. But then, something even stranger began to happen. Satsuki didn't know how to describe it. It was as if reality itself was changing, this happening in small fractions of a second. She looked at her hands, noticing how they had become larger and more masculine in appearance. But it wasn't just her hands. Her entire being changed for a brief second into that of a completely different person, a boy with black hair and eyes of the same color, with features too similar to hers. It was as if he were an opposite gender version of her. In the blink of an eye, she was back to normal. She put her hands on her head, in an attempt to calm the enormous fear she felt, while she began to back away without realizing it. As if that wasn't enough, she watched as the appearance of the entire village began to change. 1 second it looked as if it was totally destroyed, another it looked on fire, and another full of huge roots that destroyed everything in their path. More and more visions appeared, these being about a group of 4 people. Being her sensei Kakashi, her partner Sakura, her boyfriend Naruto, and that black-haired boy, who looked a lot like her. The black-haired girl was so focused on those strange visions that she didn't realize there was something behind her, not having noticed it until she crashed into it, ending up falling to the ground. The moment he managed to react and look at what he had collided with, his eyes widened, seeing in horror as if it were a corpse, but not just any person, but Kakashi Hatake himself. The body was missing a large part of its torso, revealing its ribcage and several of its organs in an extremely grotesque scene. But something that the young woman could notice was that around that large wound, there were traces of intense burns, as if the silver-haired man had been hit by something at a very high temperature. The Uchiha instantly let out a scream of pure terror, quickly backing away, standing up, after having moved away from the body a few meters. The Uchiha couldn't take her terrified gaze off that corpse, feeling herself turning pale from the whole situation. It was far worse than that nightmare. But then, a voice resonated behind her, a distorted and eerie voice, but she recognized it perfectly. "I didn't think it would happen so fast. It's getting worse." The fearful black-haired girl turned around, seeing how a few meters away from her, there was a silhouette, covered in the darkness of the night. Despite the poor lighting in that place, she was able to recognize it without much trouble. "And Naruto." It was the slight whisper that came from Satsuki's trembling lips, who had her eyes wide open, fixed on that silhouette. The moment she set her gaze on the dark figure of her beloved blonde, she felt like that feeling of terror that she had in that nightmare of the previous night came back to her. She was not able to understand why. It was supposed to be only Naruto, her boyfriend, the person she trusted the most, so why couldn't she stop shaking? The boy took a few steps forward, letting the moonlight shine on him, revealing his appearance to Satsuki. And what she saw was simply horrible. The boy's body in general was the same as always, his clothes too, the same orange suit as always. But his face. Where once was her beautiful face, her sky-blue eyes and her big smile. Now there was only some kind of deformed mass of flesh. Her appearance was simply disgusting. There was not a single facial feature, no mouth, eyes or nose. The fact that the blonde's hands were covered in blood, along with part of his deformed face, only increased the young Uchiha's panic. Even his ninja bandana was stained with blood. The moment she saw that thing, the fear that Satsuki had before, now seemed to have multiplied by 10. This was not a common fear, this was a primitive and primordial fear. The mere sight of that monster caused his mind to be flooded with the most absolute despair and even madness. Run. Escape. Survive. That was what her most primitive instincts were screaming at her. She wanted to run, to flee as fast as possible until her legs could no longer go on, anything to get as far away from that inhuman thing as possible, but her body was not responding. "I love you." The creature's distorted and eerie voice broke the tense silence that was in the place. "You know that. Right? I love all of you. But I don't understand. Why do you keep remembering?" That being finished saying, letting out a small scream, which reflected a lot of frustration and anger in each word. Once again, those strange visions invaded the Uchiha's mind. In these visions she managed to see several scenarios, although only for a few brief moments. In most of them Naruto was with his team, several battles were shown with strange subjects in black robes with red clouds. But there was one scene that completely caught his attention, which was of Naruto, completely alone, staring with an empty and dull gaze at a devastated world, full of death and destruction no matter where he went, accompanied by enormous roots that ran everywhere, leaving nothing but chaos in its wake. The visions ended, and Satsuki returned her attention to the monstrosity in front of her. I just want to get back what we once had. But I'm losing more and more of its essence. And this has been one of my most flawed worlds. That being explained. However, these words seemed to bother and confuse the black-haired girl, who was able to gather all her courage to rebuke the one she did not know if he was her beloved blonde. Defectives? But your entire harem always supports you even when they kicked you out of Konoha, Satsuki shouted angrily, trying to keep her fear from showing, but it was totally in vain. The being remained silent for a few seconds at these words. A small spark of hope arose in the young woman, believing that with what she said, Naruto would not hurt her and would stop all this madness. Ugh! That hope died the moment she heard that disgusted expression coming from that thing. Even though it had no face or anything to identify its emotions, it was obvious that it was looking at her with disgust, although she couldn't understand why. Never mind. I'll make it work. Next time. Those last 3 words sent a horrible chill through her body, being the last straw. Satsuki was finally able to move her body, turning around and starting to run desperately, wanting to escape from that thing at all costs. However, no matter how much she ran or how much strength she used, even when she used chakra, she did not advance a single step. It was as if space and reality itself did not allow her to advance, or rather, escape from that creature. Please don't run. That being said in a pleading tone, while great sadness and regret could be seen in his voice. Without knowing why, Satsuki stopped running. I don't like to chase. That horrible and distorted voice whispered in her ear, making the Uchiha's eyes widen even more. Her face had lost all traces of color, being paler than a ghost. Almost by pure instinct, Satsuki turned around, witnessing with pure horror how that deformity of flesh that Naruto had for a face was now less than a meter away from her. Now the young black-haired girl could see that horrible face in greater detail. No, that thing could not even be called a face anymore. It was nothing more than an amorphous mass of flesh with a completely disgusting appearance. The young girl's legs trembled like jelly, threatening to bring her to her knees at any moment. Every cell in her body was filled with a fear that was simply incomparable, while a feeling of inferiority was born. She felt like a mere ant standing in front of the most powerful creature of all. Gently, the being raised his blood-soaked hands and took the beautiful face of the Uchiha, who could not resist and had begun to cry from pure terror, feeling how that monster touched her face and stained it with the blood that it had. That thing seemed to be inspecting her, looking at her as if it were a doctor analyzing a seriously ill patient. It even seemed like it was sad just seeing the black-haired girl, not paying attention to the attack of fear that the kunoichi was feeling. Just look at yourself. You're so messed up, he said in an extremely sad tone and with great regret, to the point where he seemed to want to burst into tears at that very moment. But don't worry. This is my fault. I'll take care of fixing everything. And this disgusting mistake will never happen again. I swear. After finishing saying those words, the creature exerted a tighter grip on Satsuki's face, who couldn't stop crying out of fear, to the point where she had even urinated. The hands of that being were surrounded by a brilliant white light, which illuminated in a completely beautiful way in the darkness of the night. In her last moments of existence, Satsuki Uchiha could only think that that light was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen in her entire life, something that contrasted completely with the horrible appearance of the bearer of said light. In less than a second, everything was consumed by that light. It was time to try again. 10. Menma Uzumaki, one of the 3 sons of Minato Namikaze, the 4th Hokage and the Yellow Lightning of Konoha, considered by many to be the fastest ninja of that time, and Kushina Uzumaki, the blood habanero, the former Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi and a survivor of the almost extinct Uzumaki clan. A clan feared for their ridiculously large chakra reserves. Yes, the boy had certainly been very lucky to be born into such a powerful lineage. But as if being the son of such powerful and important people wasn't enough, the boy was also the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Well, sort of. It turns out that, the day he and his two brothers were born, there was a problem with a strange masked Uchiha, so his father was forced to seal the nine-tailed beast inside him and his sister, Mito Uzumaki. Because they only possessed half Uzumaki blood, their bodies would not be able to withstand the full power of that bijou, so it was divided in two and sealed to the older babies, 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚𝕚 and Mito. However, for some reason that no one understood, the Shinigami had not taken Minato's soul. No one knew what had happened, but, in Namikaze's own words, the Shinigami looked strange. The blonde didn't know exactly what was happening to that being, but something deep inside him told him that this wasn't normal at all, that something was very, very wrong. However, despite that fact, the parents were extremely happy to have survived that unfortunate accident and to have a happy life with their three children. Menma Uzumaki, Myth Uzumaki, and the youngest, Naruto Uzumaki. Throughout their lives, the three brothers had been trained by their parents, especially Menma as Mito. This was because they had to control the Kyuubi's chakra and prevent it from getting out of control. If a single out-of-control Kyuubi Jinchuriki was bad, two would be simply disastrous. As if all of the above was not enough, it turns out that his godfather, the Sannin of the Toads, Jiraiya, had told them about a prophecy that the great Toad Chief had told him, a prophecy about a child who would bring peace or destruction to the world. Thanks to that, the training that their parents gave to the trio of siblings was almost entirely concentrated on Menma and Mito. Their parents were completely sure that one of them had to be the child of the prophecy, this due to being Jinchurikis of the most powerful tailed beast. The years passed for Menma, where he began to live under the ideology that only the will of the strong mattered. He knew that the ninja world was cruel and merciless, so there was no place for the weak, only the strong had the right to survive. He was strong, so he had earned that right. But he knew it wouldn't always be like this. There were powerful clans and ninjas, so he had to keep training. And that's what he did. The years passed and Menma and Mito continued training, becoming stronger and stronger, while the whole family slowly forgot about that younger blonde named Naruto. At just 14 years old, Menma was already able to use the power of the second tail without losing control, a simply magnificent achievement for someone so young. When Menma and his brothers entered the ninja academy, the redhead met Sasuke Uchiha, the last survivor of his clan. They both shared a similar goal, which was to obtain power. This was something that Menma could respect, which was the same with Sasuke. Over time, they both became rivals. You couldn't say they were friends, they were just two people who had the same goal and respected each other for it. They didn't meddle in each other's business, the most they did was sometimes train together to get stronger. It was good for Menma to train with a Sharingan user, just as it was good for Sasuke to train with a Jinchuriki. It was a very good opportunity for both of them. What the Uzumaki didn't know was that soon everything would change. In one of Konoha's training camps, Menma launched himself at high speed against Sasuke, throwing a punch that he managed to dodge, counterattacking with a kick to the stomach, which made his opponent retreat. Quickly recovering, Menma noticed a large fireball heading towards him, managing to dodge it with some difficulty, by taking a big jump. The Uchiha took advantage of the fact that he was in the air, throwing a large number of shuriken and kunais in his direction, which Menma did not have time to dodge, protecting himself with his arms in an X shape, ending up receiving several of those weapons, which stuck in his arms, making him let out a grunt of pain. Damn! The Uzumaki muttered in pain. Do you want to continue? Sasuke would ask seriously. Who do you think you're talking to? I could do this all day, he would say with a defiant smile, as he removed the ninja weapons from his arms, using the Kyuubi's chakra to heal himself, getting into a combat stance to continue. This only brought an almost imperceptible smile to the black-haired man, who activated his two-blade Sharingan, ready to continue the fight. He would never admit it out loud, but training with his rival was, at least, entertaining. In this way, both young men launched themselves against each other, beginning to exchange blows at high speed. Sasuke now using the Sharingan to read his opponent's movements and imitate them, while Menma used the Kyuubi chakra to become stronger. The young Jinchuriki would kick his opponent in the legs, managing to throw him off balance. He did not waste this opportunity, giving him a strong headbutt, and then summoning several shadow clones, which pounced on the black-haired man. Sasuke counterattacked with a fireball jutsu, managing to make several of the clones disappear. However, he ended up being defeated by the large number of clones, which hit him at the same time, leaving him on the ground with some superficial wounds. "Fine, I win," the original 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 said simply, while pointing a kunai at Sasuke's throat, declaring him the winner. "Tch, it was just luck," said the last Uchiha with annoyance and a frown. "That's what losers say," the red-haired boy mocked with a mocking smile, eliciting a grunt of annoyance from Sasuke. Without saying another word, 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧 separated from him, letting him get up and shake the dirt off his clothes. Both were about to retreat to their respective homes, when suddenly, 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧 stopped and turned to look at his rival. "Hey, you've been really weird lately," the Uzumaki said simply and with some interest. He normally didn't get involved in his rival's personal affairs. They were none of his business, and honestly, he didn't care about them in the slightest. But this time it was different. "What do you mean?" Sasuke asked seriously, glancing at the Jinchuriki. "Don't call me a fool, Uchiha. It's obvious, you've been very distracted these days. Even in this training, it seemed like you weren't even paying attention. So stop acting mysterious and say what's wrong with you already," the redhead would say seriously, leaning against a tree while looking at his rival. "What, are you worried about me now?" the Uchiha asked mockingly. "I wish, I'm just curious," the red-haired Jinchuriki replied. For his part, Sasuke only remained silent for a few seconds, before letting out a small sigh of resignation. "It's just, I've been feeling weird lately," he said seriously. "If it's puberty, you better go see a psychologist," the redhead mocked, pointing out a vein in his rival's eye. "It's not that, you moron," she yelled angrily, before her expression changed to a more serious one. "It's just, I feel like something is wrong. I don't know how to say it, I feel like I've already lived through some things. It's like a strange déjà vu. Also, like some things aren't right, like they're unnatural. It's like, everything is just wrong." The atmosphere became tense when the Uchiha finished speaking. 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧 had only stared seriously and curiously at the black-haired man. They both remained silent for a few seconds before the redhead let out a small sigh. "Look, Sasuke, I'm not good at this stuff, besides, we're not friends, just rivals. So I can only tell you this, if you have a problem like that, you better go talk to a professional, like a psychologist," was the only thing 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧 told him, before turning around and leaving the place slowly. Sasuke didn't flinch at this, he just turned around and walked away. He wasn't surprised by the Jinchuriki's words, as they were true. Either of them considered the other a friend or a trustworthy person. They were just two people who wanted to be stronger and took advantage of each other. As 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧 walked towards his home, he could feel the gazes of the villagers upon him. Both he and his sister Mito were considered heroes for keeping the Kyuubi locked inside of them, being respected and admired by the villagers. Something that the redhead couldn't care less about. They were all weak, and he could only respect the strong ones. It was no use to him to have a bunch of bootlickers always following him around. Sometimes he felt sorry for Sasuke when he saw the large number of stalkers and fangirls he had, especially those good-for-nothing Sakura Haruno and Ino Yamanaka. A horrible shiver ran through his body at the thought that one day there might be girls who were just as obsessed with him as those two were with the black-haired boy. But leaving that aside, he couldn't help but remember the Uchiha's words, thinking about what he meant. Something's wrong? What the hell does he mean by that? Could it be that he finally went crazy after the massacre of his entire clan? The redhead thought with curiosity and intrigue, trying to find meaning in Sasuke's words. However, no matter how hard he thought, he couldn't find any real meaning in it. Maybe it was true that the massacre of his clan and his entire family was finally driving him to madness. Which, in fact, wouldn't surprise him that much, considering the massive amount of trauma he must have had. In fact, he was surprised that he had lasted so long sane after that day. He simply shook his head, pushing those thoughts out of his mind, realizing that he was already a few meters from his house. Without further ado, he just walked in. Upon entering, he headed towards the living room, meeting a young girl of his same age, who had blonde hair tied in two long pigtails, as well as blue eyes. She was his sister, Mito Uzumaki, younger than him by only a few seconds. The blonde with pigtails noticed the presence of her older brother, looking at him out of the corner of her eye, before giving a small smile. "Welcome back, brother, you finally decided to come visit your family," Mito said in a mocking tone, referring to the fact that her brother spent more time outside training than at home. It seemed like the redhead only came to visit them and that he lived in the training camp. For her part, 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 let out a small sigh at her sister's attitude, ignoring her as she headed to the kitchen, taking a bottle of water out of the refrigerator. "Where are Mom and Dad?" the boy asked bluntly, drinking the bottle to the bottom. "Dad is in his office in the Hokage Tower, and Mom just went out to buy some things," the young woman answered calmly, while relaxing on that sofa. "I see," the redhead said simply, before changing his expression to a more serious one, looking at his younger sister. You should stop lazing around so much. If you have so much time to lie there, you have time to train." "Oh, come on, I literally just finished training. Forgive my life for not being obsessed with training like you," Mito said disdainfully, rolling her eyes at her brother's attitude, who always insisted that she should train more. This was something she understood, but she resented the fact that her older brother wanted her to be as obsessed with power as he was. "Tch, whatever you want, don't complain later when the enemy is beating you up," 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 complained about his sister's carefree attitude. He just grabbed an apple and began to eat it calmly. Training always made him hungry, and he had to stay in shape. At that, an idea came to Mito's mind, remembering a certain blonde-haired boy. "Hey, if you're so desperate to make someone strong, why don't you go and train Naruto? I think it would do him good," the blonde with pigtails said vaguely and disinterestedly. At the mention of his younger brother, 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 frowned in disgust. He greatly disliked the youngest of the family. This was due not only to the fact that he was a complete weakling with no talent for the shinobi arts, but also because he was so weak, he made a mockery of his parents' legacy. "Tch, I won't waste my time with someone who doesn't even have potential. If that good-for-nothing wants to progress, let him do it alone," the redhead would say with annoyance, finishing eating to go to the bathroom to take a shower. For her part, Mito just glanced at her brother, with a bored expression on her face. She didn't say anything, just deciding to continue with her rest, taking advantage of the fact that she had nothing important to do that day. A couple of days had passed since 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚's last encounter with his Uchiha rival. He didn't care about Sasuke in the slightest, having his full concentration on training. Currently, the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki was heading in the direction of the training grounds he always used. It was early and there were few people on the streets. Several stalls hadn't even opened yet, so it was perfect to train without anyone bothering him. Upon arriving, he was a little surprised to find Sasuke Uchiha there, but that wasn't what caught his attention, but the fact that he was sitting under a tree, while his expression was one of complete shock and fear. This was something extremely rare, since it was known that the black-haired man always had that serious and cold look, never openly showing his emotions, much less something like fear. Unable to avoid his curiosity, 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 approached the last Uchiha, standing in front of him, although he had not noticed his presence, seeming to be completely lost in his thoughts. "Hey, react already, idiot," she yelled in his face with annoyance, seeing that he hadn't noticed her arrival. At the red-haired boy's scream, Sasuke finally reacted, but not in the way he expected. At that scream, the Uchiha jumped in fear, and if it weren't for the fact that he was leaning against a tree, he would have stepped back in terror. This undoubtedly caught 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 attention, who was completely surprised and intrigued as to what could have made the proud Uchiha heir so terrified. 𝕚𝕚𝕧𝕚? Sasuke asked, stuttering, while his expression showed fear and desperation from miles away. "Who else am I supposed to be? Idiot, what the hell is wrong with you? You look like you're about to have a heart attack," the boy exclaimed, frowning at Sasuke's behavior. The young black-haired man remained silent for a few seconds, while the atmosphere of the place became increasingly tense, plunging into an almost absolute silence, to the point where some flies could be heard flying nearby. Slowly, Sasuke moved, hugging her legs, while the shadow of her hair covered his eyes. "This has already happened. 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚." The voice of the young black-haired man echoed throughout the training camp due to the silence, breaking it as if it were glass. However, the young man's words only increased the tension in the place. His voice was barely an intelligible murmur, which reflected an unparalleled fear and panic. What? What the buck are you referring to? Speak clearly, damn it. I don't understand anything you're saying, the Uzumaki demanded, looking at the terrified young man with annoyance and confusion. But his surprise and intrigue increased even more when he heard a small laugh escape from the black-haired man's lips. This was undoubtedly something that threw him off. Sasuke Uchiha never laughed. That only made him understand that something was extremely wrong. He's always been here. Always. My whole life, it was a waste. My revenge. My dreams, it was all a complete waste of time. All because that thing exists. They tried to stop it. They tried everything, Menma. And in the end, it was in vain. They threw entire armies at it, and nothing worked. We can't stop that thing with that scream. Sasuke suddenly raised his head, leaving his rival stunned, who saw how the Uchiha's eyes reflected terror in its purest state. Tears came out of them non-stop, while his trembling lips formed a smile of pure fear and desperation. It's all over now. It's all over, Menma. This sight left the young Uzumaki completely in shock. He couldn't believe how the proud Uchiha had ended up in such a state of terror and despair. Looking into his eyes, he could see how they were beginning to show his fall into madness. How hope died, how happiness died, how his own mind, his pride, everything that represented Sasuke Uchiha disappeared and was consumed by the deepest darkness. He tried to reach out his hand to touch her shoulder. He wanted to tell her to calm down, to explain things better. But the moment he moved even a millimeter, Sasuke quickly stood up, running at full speed towards the forest, disappearing from his sight. When the young man reacted, it was too late. Sasuke had disappeared into that forest. Even though he wasn't really Sasuke's friend, he knew that whatever was happening was something very serious, so he didn't hesitate for a single second to run to find the Umbus and inform them of the situation. They informed the Hokage that something bad was happening with the young Uchiha, so a search began to find him. Sasuke Uchiha has committed suicide. That was the news that hit the Leaf Village hard. After spending a couple of hours looking for the young man, the Umbus had finally found him, or at least, they found his body. Deep in one of the village's many forests, Sasuke Uchiha lay dead, his body pale and cold from the enormous loss of blood and the time he was dead. He had cut his wrists with one of the kunais he carried, beneath him a pool of his own blood, while his body simply lay face down on the cold, wet ground. But as if this had not been enough, the black-haired man had left a message, a single phrase written on the ground in his own blood, something that left everyone who read it confused. He's always been here. The news spread faster than wildfire throughout the village, even though the Umbus tried to prevent this from happening, on the orders of the Hokage, to avoid an uproar. Although it was in vain, the entire village was already aware that they had lost the last Uchiha they possessed. Currently, Minato was in a meeting with the clan leaders and counselors. The meeting was to discuss the incident that had happened with Sasuke Uchiha, and simply, things were not going well at all. This is terrible. With the death of that boy, Konoha has lost its most powerful clan. The Uchiha clan is officially extinct, exclaimed one of the counselors furiously and worried, hitting the table in anger. I don't understand how the young Uchiha ended up committing suicide. A few days ago he was in a normal state, another counselor mentioned seriously. Please, I asked you all to calm down. I know perfectly well that the situation is very serious, but getting upset like this will not solve anything, the blonde Namikaze would say seriously, managing to make those present calm down. However, you are right about one thing. I cannot understand how the young Uchiha could have made that decision, Shikaku Nara would say seriously, analyzing the situation. Maybe the boy couldn't bear the trauma of the massacre of his clan any longer. That could have led him to commit suicide. I mean, it's already strange that a child of his age didn't end up going crazy from such a traumatic event, one of the counselors would say seriously. No, not that. Since the massacre of his clan, we had been doing psychological tests on the boy every month, and although he showed serious psychological after effects, there were no signs that could lead him to suicide. On the contrary, he sought to become strong in order to take revenge on the murderer of his clan, the Nara explained with utmost seriousness. Leaving aside the cause of his suicide, there is something else that has intrigued me. Minato spoke, drawing the attention of those present. The Umbus said that he had written a message before dying. The Hokage's words made those present remember that detail, that strange message that the boy left before dying. He has always been here. That's what he wrote. What do you think it means? We don't know exactly. He may have been referring to someone who was stalking him, but the information he gave us is too little, nothing concise, just pure theories with no real basis, Minato would say seriously. This caused even more intrigue among those present. They suspected that someone could have driven the boy to suicide, but they had nothing to indicate if that was even true. It was a dead end. They needed to investigate, to find something. Some suspected that there was a traitor in their village, but that led them to the same point as they had no evidence. What they did know was that they had officially lost their most powerful clan and an important military resource. While the meeting was taking place, 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 had returned home. He had several things to think about after having learned of his rival's suicide. Although they were not close or anything, that did not mean that he wished him death, or that he was a monster. Still, he couldn't understand what kind of event could have left Sasuke so terrified that he would commit suicide. Just like with the councilman and his father, he remembered that message that the Uchiha had written before he died. Has he always been here? What does he mean? Thought the confused and intrigued boy. He would arrive home and enter without further ado, noticing that his mother and sister were not there. Without giving it too much importance, he was going to go to his room to rest. However, a very familiar voice reached his ears. Welcome home, brother. 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 turned in the direction of the owner of the voice, meeting his younger brother, the youngest of the family by a few minutes. Naruto stared at him, standing a few meters away from him, while having a neutral look. I heard the news about Sasuke. It's a real shame. I can't imagine what could have led him to commit such an action, she would say with sadness and regret in her voice. But her neutral expression didn't change at any time, contrasting with the emotions her voice conveyed. Yes, that's what everyone in the village is thinking, the redhead replied boredly, looking disinterestedly at his weakling brother. Are you okay? If you want we can talk, the blonde proposed, still keeping his gaze completely fixed on his brother, to the point where he seemed not to blink, something that began to bother the young Jinchuriki a little. No thanks, I have better things to do, and you too, if what you want is to do something good for me, you could start by training and getting stronger, so at least you wouldn't make a fool of our parents' legacy. After saying those words, 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 turned around, heading towards his room. All without noticing the gloomy look on his younger brother's face, his blue eyes showing a glint of disappointment towards his brother. The next day, 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 had woken up after a long night of sleep. He stood up, ready to start a new day. As he always did, he ate breakfast and quickly retreated to the training grounds. Even though his teammate and rival had died, he wasn't going to let that event stop him from becoming stronger. After all, the dead man wasn't going to come back to life. However, that day was not ordinary. There was something in the atmosphere that felt strange. The redhead didn't know how to describe it exactly. It was as if his own instincts, his own being, were warning him that something very bad was about to happen. But he decided to just ignore that feeling, arriving at the training camp to do that action. And after a few hours it would end, deciding to go back home. He knew that if he arrived too late, his mother would be angry, and he wasn't stupid enough to provoke the wrath of the woman who earned the title of the Bloody Habanero. As 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 returned home, he noticed how the atmosphere became more tense with each step he took. A horrible chill ran through his entire being. The hairs on his neck stood up and he began to sweat coldly without even knowing it. What the hell is wrong with me? The young Uzumaki muttered in confusion. With each step he took, he felt the environment become quieter and quieter. All sound disappeared as if nothing had happened, barely able to hear his own breathing. After what seemed like an eternity, 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 finally stood in front of the door of his home. He couldn't understand what was happening. It was just the door of his home, the house where he grew up and was raised, so why did he feel so nervous? Scared? He didn't know. But something told him that what he would find inside would not be anything good. He shook his head, trying to push those ridiculous thoughts away. It was absurd. This was his home. There was no reason to be afraid. Taking a breath, he gathered all his courage, grabbed the door handle and threw it open, quickly entering without even noticing the dark atmosphere inside. "Mom, Dad, Mito, I'm here," the redhead shouted, waiting to be greeted by his family. And then he saw it. His mother, his father, his sister. They were dead. The blood of the three decorated the floor and walls of what was once a warm home, as if it were some kind of twisted, hellish work of art. 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚𝕚 eyes were open as wide as his biology allowed, reflecting horror in its purest form. He saw how his father's body was impaled against the wall by what appeared to be spears made of bones, which pierced his arms, legs, stomach, and head, leaving him in a state almost unrecognizable if it were not for his clothes. His mother, the woman who had given birth to him and raised him, who had taught him to walk, talk, and read, was split in half. Her hand was stretched out towards him, as if she had tried to escape before dying from massive blood loss. Her organs were sticking out from the bottom, staining the floor and giving the scene an even more disgusting appearance. And finally, her younger sister lay decapitated against a wall. Her head had been torn off so savagely that part of her spine was sticking out from under her neck. Liters and liters of still fresh blood came out of the three corpses, staining a large part of the room with that intense red color. 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚𝕚, who believed himself capable of enduring any scene, could not bear it any longer and fell to the ground, doubling over as he vomited, emptying his stomach of all its contents. When she stopped vomiting and was able to look up, tears could be seen flowing down her eyes without stopping. Her lips were trembling, as was her entire body. But then, something caught his attention, or rather, someone. A figure he knew perfectly, standing in front of a wall, with his back to him. "And Naruto," the confused redhead murmured, instantly noticing how the blonde's body was stained with blood. No, it couldn't be possible, right? He knew they didn't have the best family relationship, but would that weakling really go so far as to kill them? "You finally arrived, dear brother." The blonde spoke, his voice being completely distorted and deeper, completely devoid of emotions, making 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 tremble with fear just by listening to him. His instincts screamed at him to escape from there. "I tried. I thought that this time, things would be different. I thought it would turn out well. But it wasn't like that. This creation is disgusting. Minato and Kushina, forgetting one of their children? Hee. What a bad joke." 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 was completely confused by his brother's words, but then he noticed a strange, pure white aura surrounding the blonde. The Jinchuriki couldn't take his eyes off that aura, which moved upwards as if it were fire, a fire of such a pure white color that it made any other shade of that color look ridiculous. It was simply beautiful, glorious, and imposing at the same time. He could easily say that the light that aura emitted was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his entire life. But his brother's words forced him out of his thoughts. "I guess I'll have to do it again." As he said those words, the boy turned around, finally facing the redhead. And as he did so, the boy's eyes widened in the most primitive and absolute fear, seeing how Naruto's face was completely disfigured into a shapeless and disgusting mass of flesh, completely devoid of any human features. He finally found the strength to move, getting up and running away at full speed from the house where he had grown up for so many years. 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 didn't pay attention to anything, not even the absence of people on the streets, nor how reality was beginning to deform in a grotesque way. He was only focused on escaping. He wanted to get away as quickly as possible from that monstrosity. Never in his entire life had he felt so afraid. But it wasn't just that. Upon seeing that thing, a feeling of inferiority like no other arose deep within him, forcing him to do what he never thought he would do in his life: run away completely terrified. In his fear and need to escape, 𝕚𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 would end up entering the forest of death, without even realizing it. He would jump between the branches of the trees, until one of them would break, causing him to fall suddenly to the ground. Luckily, the fall didn't cause him much damage. However, when he opened his eyes, he saw with horror how that forest had become a completely disgusting and horrible landscape. The trees seemed to be made of a fleshy, slimy mass. The branches were now disgusting tentacles, which moved in the air, as if they had a life of their own. The ground was also now made of that slimy flesh, along with eyes and tentacles, as well as other fleshy figures that were simply impossible to describe. But despite how horrible that scene looked, everything was illuminated by that strange and beautiful light that Naruto emitted. That landscape was as if heaven and hell themselves had merged, resulting in that scene. In a second, 𝕠𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚𝕚 just blinked, and the moment he opened his eyelids, there it was. That monstrosity that was supposed to be his brother was in front of him, just 2 meters away, that mass of deformed flesh that had a face stuck on him, making him feel that feeling of inferiority again. Suddenly, the silence of the place would be broken when the creature would speak to 𝕠𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚, with that distorted and eerie voice that characterized him. I love you. But you don't understand. None of you understand yet. I love all of you, my beautiful friends. My precious friends. My precious creations. That's why I do this. For our bonds. For our happiness. Hate? Revenge? Grudge? No, it's none of that. This is for love. There can't be a purer act of love than this. I love every part of you, everything, even every mistake. I love you all. But I can't understand why you're still so defective. Don't you understand that it hurts me? It hurts me to see how they are deformed into these disgusting cheap copies. It hurts me a lot. And I hate it. I hate it with all my being. It gets worse every time, since they lose more and more of their essence. Each version I create is further and further away from the original. But you don't have to be afraid, my little creations. Because I will never abandon you. Because, after all, we are all friends. The place would be flooded by the deepest primordial fear, while a disgusting smell of putrefaction would flood 𝕠𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚𝕚 nose, to the point where he felt like he was about to vomit. To his complete horror, he would see how that thing began to deform in a grotesque way. Little by little the figure of Naruto Uzumaki would be lost, beginning to give way to something else. But just at that moment, the redhead would react, standing up and turning around, trying to run with all his might, but this would be in vain, since reality itself would be deformed, making it so that no matter how hard 𝕠𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 ran, he would not advance a single millimeter, only listening behind him as that thing transformed. Amidst the sounds of bones breaking and flesh tearing grotesquely. After a few seconds, those disgusting and repugnant sounds would cease, understanding that his transformation had ended. And, to the redhead's horror, he would see how thin arms made of rotten flesh embraced him. He felt how the entity stuck to his body from behind, while caressing his face in an almost sickly way. He didn't dare turn around, not wanting to see him. He didn't want anything, he just wanted all this hell to end once and for all. It's a real shame. I would have loved for us to be a happy family. But you shouldn't even have existed. Despite everything, I'm glad to meet you. See you soon. My dear brother. The creature spoke with an even more deformed and disturbing voice, although the regret and sadness in his voice could be noticed. By this point, 𝕠𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 was crying his eyes out from the immense terror he felt, but even so, inside, he felt some peace, since he knew that he was going to die, and all that horror would finally end. In his final moments, 𝕠𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚 Uzumaki watched as everything was consumed by that white, beautiful, blinding light. And in the end, there was nothing. Well, it's time to do it again. Where your skin's suffering not cause us suffering for you. Sakura Haruno walked calmly through the streets of her village. Today was just another day in the Leaf Village. The villagers were going about their business or chatting with each other. Families were going out for a walk. In general, it was a quiet day for anyone. Except for her. The pink-haired girl had an expression of anguish and sadness, as she walked aimlessly through the village, just looking to clear her mind of recent events. She could still remember how everything was normal just a week ago. She had graduated from the ninja academy and had been assigned to her team, in which, luckily for her, she was with her boyfriend, her beloved Sasuke. Although she also had to put up with the unbearable Naruto. That red-haired boy, the one considered the best in the academy in every aspect, both in strength and intellect, who always argued with Sasuke and ended up getting into trouble, he always disliked that boy. Although there was always something strange about him, like the time when in the exams he showed extremely rare abilities, especially when he revealed to have, not one, but 2 digitsus, something bucking strange. When she took the test, her left eye turned completely purple, with black rings in it, while her right eye turned sky blue, with a white flower-shaped pattern with yellow details. To say that everyone was in shock that day was an understatement. After their team was formed, they had started to be given simple and easy missions, including the annoying mission of capturing that unbearable cat. Until everything went to hell. "Hey, Sakura," a female voice very familiar to her, managing to get her out of her depressing thoughts. When Sakura looked up, she found herself staring at none other than Ino Yamanaka, her former friend and rival for Sasuke's love. But instead of bothering her like he normally would, this time he approached her with a sad face that showed compassion. "Hello Ino, what do you need?" the young kunoichi asked, looking at the blonde, not being in the mood or wanting to argue with her. Something that the Yamanaka noticed immediately, worrying more about her. "I wanted to know how you were. It's been a week since the incident, so I wanted to know how you were handling it," the blonde explained with a voice that reflected compassion for the pink-haired girl. "Thanks Ino, I appreciate it," Sakura murmured, although giving her a grateful smile, showing that she was happy and grateful for the blonde's gesture, something that was noticed by Ino, who smiled back. "Come on, I'll treat you to some dangos, do you want some?" the blonde suggested with a small smile, trying to cheer up her rival at least a little. Sakura, for her part, just nodded silently, accepting Ino's proposal. Thus, both young kunoichi headed to a nearby dango stand, entering and asking for their order, which was brought to them within a few minutes. Once they both had their dangos, they began to eat them calmly, neither of them daring to say anything, which ended up generating a rather awkward silence, to the point where the tension in the place could be cut like a knife. Ino was quite nervous because of the silence that overwhelmed the place, to the point where she could feel a little sweat falling down her forehead due to her nerves. She tried to concentrate on her dangos, while thinking of something to talk about and be able to get out of that uncomfortable situation. However, it was Sakura herself who spoke first, finally breaking that awkward atmosphere. "So, do you know anything about him? Did your father tell you anything?" the pink-haired girl asked with clear concern in her voice. Ino was not an idiot, she knew perfectly well what he meant, so she could only let out a small sigh, while she left her dangos on a plate on the table. "My father doesn't tell me much about it, because it's confidential. At most he's mentioned one thing or another, but it was because I insisted too much," the blonde would say, changing her expression and tone of voice to a more serious one. "And what did she say?" the pink-haired girl insisted on knowing with concern, to which her rival, or friend, let out a heavy sigh before answering. "He said the damage is enormous, and that he will probably be like this for life." Those words were like a bucket of cold water for the pink-haired girl, who opened her eyes wide, feeling her face turn pale with horror as she went into shock. She clenched her fists tightly as she looked down, biting her lip to keep from bursting into tears, but that couldn't stop a couple of tears from falling down her cheeks and ending up dripping onto the table in front of her. This was instantly noticed by Ino, who felt bad for her friend, moving closer to her and putting her hand on her shoulder in support, since she understood perfectly how she must have been feeling. "I don't understand how this could happen," Sakura murmured in a brittle voice, while she wiped away the few tears she had shed. "Sakura, I know we can't do anything to change this, but we can go visit him. Maybe this will help him get better," the blonde would say, trying to console her friend with that false hope since the chances of that working were almost zero. The jade-eyed girl simply nodded at Ino's words, perhaps convincing herself that this would work, or she simply wanted to go visit him and spend time with him, she herself didn't know. After that little conversation, both girls finished eating their dangos, paying for them and leaving the place, starting to head to a specific place. The Konoha Asylum. That establishment had been built by Tobirama Senju himself, after seeing the number of ninjas who ended up with serious traumas after the wars. These ninjas ended up there, with the aim of helping them overcome their traumas. They were cared for by different medical ninjas who ensured their health, and most of them were treated by members of the Yamanaka clan, who, thanks to their abilities to enter the minds of others, were more than perfect for this job. Currently, the leader of the Yamanaka clan, Inoichi Yamanaka, was in charge of running this place where a new tenant now resided. Both young kunoichis managed to enter the place, thanks to a favor that Ino had to ask her father. If the situation were normal, the man would have flatly refused. However, he knew that both girls were acquaintances of the patient, and, although their visit would not cure him, he knew that the company of others could help improve the subject's mood, so he decided to make an exception for that occasion. Right now, Sakura and Ino were walking through the halls of the asylum, being guided by Inoichi himself. As the trio advanced, the younger girls managed to see several metal doors, which had small windows in them, which allowed them to briefly see the residents of said place. There were both men and women of different ages in that place. All of them were in white padded rooms, with straitjackets, which restricted their movements, especially of their hands, this to prevent them from doing any type of jutsu. From what little they could see, the patients were mostly either leaning against a wall, staring into space, or walking aimlessly around their small room, something that gave them both a slight chill. Inoichi just sighed internally at that. He didn't like them seeing these people and how they had ended up. Several were survivors of the old war, who had been in that place ever since. Others were simply ordinary people, who had the misfortune of not having enough mental strength to face the horrors that being a shinobi entailed. It was a horrible truth. Not everyone was trained to see their companions die every few seconds or carry out cold-blooded murders. Several ended up losing their minds and were thrown into said building. Inoichi knew that his daughter was going to end up discovering the dark side of the ninja world. It was just a matter of time. However, he preferred that she discover this way what such work can do to a person, than experiencing it firsthand in some war or deadly mission. At least that way she could reconsider continuing to be a kunoichi or taking her training more seriously, and the same applied to her pink-haired friend. After a couple of minutes, the three individuals arrived in front of a door, stopping in front of it, while the adult turned to look at the young kunoichis. "He's in there," the Yamanaka would say seriously, before changing his posture and expression to a much more serious and firm one now. "Listen carefully, he's been stable these past 2 days. But you shouldn't upset him. Talk to him calmly and avoid any topic that could cause conflict, understood?" "Yes, Dad, don't worry, nothing bad will happen," Ino would say seriously. At this, Inoichi just sighed, before opening the door, allowing the girls to enter, seeing that it was a white room, with a picture lighting the place. In front of them was a wooden table with 2 chairs for them. And there he was, wearing one of those white straitjacket shirts, just like all the other patients in the building, only unlike those guys, he had bandages covering his eyes. Both girls looked sadly and worriedly at the boy sitting in front of them, before taking a seat across from him. The boy seemed calm, despite not being able to see anything. The medical ninjas had previously informed him that he was going to have visitors. They had even told him who they were, which had not surprised him much, since they had always been behind him. Just seconds after sitting down, Sakura was the first to speak. "We are very happy to see you, Sasuke." Indeed, that boy in front of both young kunoichis was none other than Sasuke Uchiha himself, the last living member of his clan after the massacre that occurred years ago, possibly one of the greatest tragedies in the history of the Country of Fire. But how did he end up in that building? How did the proud Uchiha end up in that state? The answer is much simpler than you might imagine. But as simple as it is also very disappointing. And that answer is: nobody knows. Absolutely no one knows the reason. No one has managed to find a why. Not even the Yamanakas managed to find the long-awaited answer, not even by using their jutsus. When they tried to access the mind of the young black-haired man, they realized something horrible, and that was that they couldn't do it. The reason for this was well known to them. Their jutsus only allowed them to enter the healthy minds of people. However, they couldn't enter minds that were too damaged. This was because their thoughts, memories and emotions were so unstable that they ended up being expelled immediately. It was as if they were trying to fly inside a large tornado. So the answer to those questions was that there was no answer. Plus, there's the fact that it was something completely sudden. One random night, one of the many ninjas on the night shift was standing guard near the Uchiha compound, when he suddenly heard some heartbreaking screams coming from the black-haired boy's house. But they were not normal screams. They were screams that demonstrated a total mix of fear, desperation, terror, and other negative feelings. It seemed as if they were killing or torturing someone. And when he went in to see what was happening, he found a scene that simply left him in shock. Sasuke Uchiha was lying in a fetal position on the floor of his room, clutching his head with both hands, shaking from pure terror and despair. But that wasn't the worst. The worst came when he realized that the Uchiha no longer had his eyes, showing his empty eye sockets with large scratch marks around them. At first he thought that someone had come in and stolen his eyes, which would be believable, since his clan was famous for its incredible ocular powers. However, this thought disappeared just as he saw the black-haired man's face in more detail, noticing a kind of red, viscous mass all over his skin. Later, the ninjas realized that in a fit of madness, Sasuke himself had torn out his own eyes, before crushing them with his own hands and rubbing them all over his face, while his empty sockets bled non-stop, ending up covering the boy's face with his own blood and the remains of those eyes he was so proud of. After that, more ninjas were called and the news reached the Hokage and the counselors, who instantly noticed the mental state the black-haired man was in, having no other option but to take him to the asylum and hope they could help him. The ninjas in that building were surprised by the state of the last Uchiha of the village, not physically, but psychologically. From the moment they put him in his room, he did not stop shouting nonsensical things, to the point where his throat hurt. "Don't you understand, idiots? Everything is already doomed, the end of everything is just around the corner, and you waste your time with stupid things, hatred, wars. Don't be stupid, he doesn't care about any of that, we are insignificant, our lives are worthless, did you hear me? You are worthless." The black-haired man writhed in his room while shouting those phrases that those present did not understand, to the point where they had to start injecting him with some drugs to keep him calm. But no matter how hard they tried, no one could find the answers the Hokage demanded. No one knew why the Uchiha had gone mad or what he meant by those words. Because of this, his team stopped their activities until further notice. But the normal thing would be that they would be given a new member, as a replacement for Sasuke due to his condition. And after all that, we come to this scene. The black-haired man remained silent for a few seconds after hearing the pink-haired woman's words. He was on medication, which kept him calm so he could talk to both girls. For both of them, those seconds in which the boy didn't say anything felt like an eternity, while a great tension was present, making them sweat and swallow saliva from their nerves. "Thanks, I'm glad you came, it's a bit lonely here." The black-haired man spoke, breaking the silence. Despite his answer, Sakura and Ino were somewhat nervous when they heard the boy's tone of voice. He seemed tired and at the same time a little dizzy, as if the simple act of speaking was exhausting for him, which was due to the medication they were giving him. But they both decided to ignore this, to continue with the conversation. "So, how have you been?" Ino asked nervously, knowing it was a stupid question, but it was the only thing that came to mind to continue the conversation. "Well, I guess I don't do much," Sasuke answered, shrugging his shoulders. "How are things outside? What happened to our team, Sakura?" "Well, they suspended our missions for a while," said the pink-haired girl, omitting the part that they would end up assigning them a new member as their replacement, not wanting to give her more stress than she already had. "I understand," he said simply as a response, remaining silent. Both kunoichis looked at each other out of the corner of their eyes with increasing nervousness. To tell the truth, neither of them knew the black-haired man in depth, despite being his fangirls and main crushes, which they were realizing at that moment. They didn't know his tastes, his hobbies, or anything. So, in an act of desperation, Ino said something that ruined everything. "Why, if you want, next time we could call Kakashi and Naruto to come visit you too. I'm sure they'll be happy to see you," she exclaimed with a nervous smile, not noticing the pink-haired girl's slight gesture of disgust at the name of the red-haired man with 2 digits. And, at that moment, everything went to hell. It was as if the young Yamanaka had said some kind of evil spell, which ended up destroying all the calm that was in that room. They both noticed how quickly Sasuke's breathing began to accelerate, becoming erratic, as if the medications had stopped taking effect on him, which alarmed them both. "Sasuke, are you okay?" the pink-haired girl asked very nervously, bringing one of her hands closer to the Uchiha, trying to grab his shoulder to calm him down. No, that scream startled both girls, who stepped back from the fright it caused them. "Sasuke," Ino murmured, scared and worried. "Don't you understand, you stupid people? He's here, he's to blame for everything that has happened, is happening and will continue to happen. He's to blame for everything, we can't do anything. We're doomed, why doesn't anyone understand? You bucking idiots, the black-haired man shouted at the top of his lungs, not caring if his throat hurt from the force, while he writhed in his seat, trying to free himself from the straitjacket that held him back. Almost immediately, the metal door opened and a pair of medical ninjas entered, holding the black-haired man. What the hell happened here? What did they say to him? ℕ𝕒𝕣𝕬𝕣𝕧𝕚 exclaimed to both girls, seeing how upset the newest patient in the asylum was. We didn't say anything bad to him, we just wanted to help him, Ino answered very nervously, both because of her father's scolding and because of Sasuke's condition. ℕ𝕒𝕣𝕬𝕣𝕧 watched out of the corner of his eye as one of the ninjas took out a syringe with the medicine, ready to inject it into the patient, who writhed in place with no intention of stopping, letting out a sigh as he massaged his temples. Just go, we'll talk later, the adult would say seriously. Knowing that they had nothing more to do in that place and situation, the girls left the room, starting to head towards the exit of the asylum, but not before hearing one last scream from Sasuke, before being injected with the medicine that kept him calm. The world is a lie, we are toys of a higher being. After a few minutes, both girls left the building, now sitting on a bench, while they had their heads down because of what just happened with the black-haired man. Well, that was intense, the blonde Yamanaka would say nervously. I'd say it was a little more than just intense, the pink-haired girl growled under her breath, clearly annoyed and frustrated. That had gone terribly wrong. They hadn't been able to talk to Sasuke for even 5 minutes, and what was worse was that the meeting ended with the boy having another fit of madness. However, there was something that kept her confused, and it was the last sentence they heard as he left. The world is a lie, we are toys of a superior being. Sakura looked up, turning to see Ino, who was the one who had said that, finding that she had a serious face, while she held her chin with her fingers. What do you think it means? I asked, while looking back at the girl with the prominent forehead. Not the slightest idea, maybe he has schizophrenia, he assumed this, although he knew little or nothing about psychology. It was the only thing that came to mind to justify the behavior of the last Uchiha. It's possible, the blonde from the Yamanaka clan mentioned, before letting out a heavy sigh. I'm sorry that this ended like this, Sakura. It would be best for me to go home. When my father comes back, I'll ask him about Sasuke. See you later. Ino said goodbye as she turned around and began to walk away, walking towards her home until she disappeared from her green-eyed friend's sight. Sakura just remained silent, watching the blonde leave until she could no longer see her. She just let out a small sigh. The whole situation was too strange, to the point where she felt overwhelmed. Right now, he just wanted to go home and take a nap to try to forget a little about what happened a few seconds ago. However, when she turned around to leave, she heard a voice that she knew perfectly, which only made her frown in clear disgust. Oh hey Sakura, I didn't think I'd find you here, said no one but Naruto, who looked at the pink-haired girl with a neutral expression. TCH, what do you want, Naruto? The girl asked, turning to look at the redhead. Although, internally she was surprised to see the imperious and energetic boy, having that neutral expression on his face, something very unusual and not typical of Naruto. However, she decided to ignore it. She had enough with what had happened with Sasuke. I was just walking and I saw you here and I wanted to stop by and say hello. By the way, do you have any news of Sasuke? I haven't heard anything since the incident? The redhead asked curiously, but without changing his neutral expression in the slightest, something that had begun to make the young kunoichi a little uncomfortable. What do you care? Look, Naruto, I have much more important things to do than wasting time with you. Goodbye, the girl would say, looking with undisguised disgust at the redhead, before turning around and being ready to leave. Wait, Sakura, if you want we could go eat ramen or something. You look very tense, the redhead suggested, approaching the girl. However, she just turned around and threw a punch at the boy's face, being very angry. Leave me alone, he yelled at him, while his punch hit Naruto's face. However, she was shocked to see how the redhead had not moved even a millimeter after receiving that blow. He had not moved even a hair, and he did not grimace in pain either. Instead, she quickly pulled her fist back, feeling a sharp pain in her hand, beginning to rub it to ease the pain. But what? The green-eyed girl murmured in astonishment, since she was the one who was most hurt by that action. As he hit the boy's face, he felt as if he had hit a diamond wall with a stick. Turning to look at the redhead, who still had that neutral expression on his face, only now his eyes had a gleam of disappointment and boredom, which gave him a bad feeling. Well, it seems I'll have to do it again, Naruto muttered with an empty and tired voice, giving the girl a chill. Sakura was about to ask what he meant, but she didn't get around to it when she saw something that made her blood run cold. Naruto's face began to disfigure in a completely horrible, disgusting and grotesque way. He could hear some bones creaking as they broke, his eyes crushed together until they exploded like little balloons, his lips melted shut, his nose disappeared. And that disgusting process continued until his face was replaced by a disgusting and disfigured mass of shapeless flesh. His body began to tremble in complete terror, feeling like every part of his body was screaming for him to escape from that abomination. For her, it was as if all time had stopped, except for the two of them, as she watched an aura of the purest and most beautiful white color she had ever seen in her life begin to surround that thing, flowing upwards as if it were fire. And, in less than a second, everything was consumed by light. Next time, it will be better. I swear. Number 1, ℕ𝕒𝕣𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚𝕚. It was just another day in the village of Konoha. The beautiful blue sky was adorned by a few clouds, the sun's rays adorning and illuminating the entire village, as well as giving it a touch and aura of tranquility. But our attention is focused on a young kunoichi with black hair and pearl eyes, characteristic of a certain clan. She was none other than Hinata Hyuga herself, the heiress of said clan, one of the most powerful in the village, due to its powerful jujutsu. The young Hyuga was known for her great shyness and lack of self-esteem, both because of the expectations she had as the heir of her clan, and because of the great pressure her own father imposed on her. However, this time there was something strange about her, something that was not common in her behavior and personality. The girl's gaze showed nothing but great and deep fear. She looked quite upset, looking everywhere, as if she wanted to make sure of something, or rather, of someone. The young Hyuga was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't realize that, as she turned a corner, she ended up colliding with someone, causing her to almost fall to the ground when she lost her balance. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. The black-haired girl had spoken, quickly apologizing to continue on her way, or at least, that was her plan. Hinata's pearly eyes widened, staring in complete horror at the person she had collided with. She recognized him instantly, that spiky black hair, his blue eyes, slightly tanned skin, and 3 marks on his cheek. Her heart seemed to stop for a second, as she turned pale with fear, unable to prevent her body from trembling slightly from the immense fear she felt. And Naruto, the terrified girl murmured, while her legs trembled like jelly, looking like she was going to fall to her knees at any moment. Sure enough, the boy in front of him was none other than Naruto Uzumaki, his childhood friend. She remembered him perfectly. It would be impossible for her to forget him. They had met years ago, when some children were bothering her for her eyes. At that time he protected her, and since then they had become friends, even though at first the black-haired boy's personality was cold and sharp. But over time he began to open up more to the Hyuga, to the point of considering her his best friend, almost like a sister. But, if they were supposed to be almost like brothers, why was Hinata so afraid of him? Was it the QB sealed inside the black-haired man? No. Was it about how cold and sadistic he was with his enemies? No. The answer to this was much more complicated than such simple things. For a second, the Hyuga's gaze fell on the black-haired Uzumaki's face, noticing something that seemed extremely strange to her. Completely different from the cold expression he always showed to absolutely everyone except her, Naruto now had a neutral expression on his face. But it wasn't curt, indifferent, or emotionless, it was simply neutral. He looked like he was bored with everything he saw. He looked like a tired shinobi who had returned from the war and had seen the worst horrors it had to offer, something extremely strange coming from the cold, sharp and even sadistic Naruto Uzumaki. However, she had to react when she heard the boy's voice addressing her. Is everything okay, Hinata? the boy's monotonous and completely neutral voice asked, staring fixedly at the girl in front of him, to the point where it seemed like he didn't even blink while looking at her, which only made the girl even more nervous. "Why, yes, everything's okay, and Naruto," she responded quickly, although she couldn't help but stutter because of the great fear she felt, something that was noticed by the black-haired man, who didn't change his expression in the slightest. "Are you sure? If you need anything you can ask, you know I'm here to support you," the boy said, getting a little closer to Hinata, extending his hand to help her up, something that, previously, she would never do, dealing with her childhood friend. At this action, Hinata only opened her eyes even more, while she pushed the boy's hand away with a slap. This should have surprised Naruto, but it didn't. His neutral expression didn't change in the slightest, only keeping his gaze still fixed on the Hyuga. "Are you sure everything is okay, Hinata?" the black-haired man asked again. "Yes, everything is okay," was the only thing the girl said, before standing up as quickly as possible and running out of that place. She only intended to get away from that boy as much as possible. For his part, Naruto didn't say anything, just keeping his gaze fixed in the direction where she had gone. Although his expression didn't change, his eyes showed an emotion, although it was difficult to notice it due to that neutral facial expression, and that emotion was disgust. Disgusting. It was the light whisper that came from the boy's lips, his voice denoting the disgust he felt when he saw the Hyuga. Without saying anything else, he simply turned around, beginning to leave the place in complete and absolute silence. Hinata ran into her home, not saying a word to any of her family, just running quickly until she reached her room, slamming the door shut. Obviously, this caught the attention of her sister and father, due to the strange behavior of the black-haired girl. Once inside her room, the girl locked the door tightly to make sure no one came in. Not satisfied with that, she closed all the windows, covering them with the curtains, and then sat on her bed, feeling her breathing accelerated and her heart pumping 1,000 times a second, as if at any moment it was going to explode. This has to be a nightmare. He can't be real," the girl murmured in terror, her eyes open as wide as her anatomy allowed. Hinata watched as her hands were shaking in sheer terror, unable to calm down. That guy. It can't be Naruto," the young heiress of the Hyugas whispered, while slowly a tiny smile appeared on her lips, from which a small laugh escaped. But it wasn't a laugh that denoted fun or grace, it was a laugh full of dread and despair, while her trembling hands went to her head, desperately grabbing her hair, to the point where it seemed like she would tear it out at any moment. That's it, right? It can't be the real one. It must be an imposter, yes. That must be it. It's surely nothing more than someone pretending to be Naruto, hee. The girl laughed in a terrified and desperate way, while she looked at her hands again, seeming that for a brief second they were full of a red and somewhat thick liquid. It's not real. That's not Naruto. He's only in my mind, it's not real. The Hyuga murmured to herself, curled up in a corner, while little by little she began to let out more and more laughter, which resonated in her lonely and dark room. At the same time this was happening, on the other side of the village, you can see the last remaining Uchiha, the heir of said clan, Sasuke Uchiha. At this moment, the young black-haired man was very thoughtful, due to the strange events that had happened in the last week. This had begun to feel weird, like someone wasn't right. Looking around, he couldn't help but feel like everything was wrong, that things felt unnatural, like they shouldn't be that way. Something strange, since he had never had these kinds of thoughts before, only being focused on his revenge against his brother. But currently he felt as if that didn't even matter, as if that mission he imposed on himself meant absolutely nothing in the face of this. And what finally confirmed to him that something was wrong were the disturbing and bizarre nightmares he suffered, which always had the same elements. A huge field of beautiful flowers, an eerie atmosphere. Only for the flowers to turn into corpses afterwards. He could never tell who they were torn to pieces, barely able to make out the torn-off arms and legs, and standing in front of everyone. A figure he knew very well, with its back turned to him. Only to wake up later, terrified and restless, but at the same time, feeling that he had had that strange dream before. But that day, it was something different. When he woke up, he felt like he had to go somewhere. He didn't know where it was or why he had to go, it was simply as if something, or someone, was calling him. And that's how he got to the present moment, walking through the streets of the village, aimlessly, just letting his body guide him to where he was supposed to go, all this while little by little, the beautiful rays of the sun and the blue sky began to be covered by a large amount of gray clouds and thunder began to be heard. A storm was approaching. Before Sasuke could realize it, he had already arrived at his destination, which was a ramen restaurant named Ichiraku, something that left him confused. Without paying attention to this, he entered the place, and the moment he crossed the door, he felt a huge chill run through his body. A few meters away from him was Naruto, eating a bowl of ramen at one of the many tables in the place. The strange thing was that there was absolutely no one else in the place, not even the owners of the establishment were present. But ignoring this, the Uchiha walked shakily to that table, even though every part of his body was screaming at him to escape from that place without looking back, all just to stay away from the black-haired boy. But nevertheless, he decided to ignore this, sitting in front of the blue-eyed boy. "I'm glad you came," Sasuke Naruto's neutral and almost bored voice spoke, barely looking or paying attention to the Uchiha in front of him, only dedicating himself to eating his ramen, as if the other boy in front of him had no importance whatsoever. Sasuke had to fight to stop shaking, swallowing down that fear so he could finally get the words out. This is the part where you kill me?" the Uchiha asked nervously, which he tried to hide, but it was completely in vain. He didn't even know how, but he was aware that the black-haired man in front of him was perfectly capable of annihilating him without any problems, and that was even though they had faced each other before and had ended in a draw. But now, he felt that if he tried to face him, it would end very, very badly. At this question, Naruto stopped eating his ramen for a second, looking up to see the Uchiha with that neutral, almost empty gaze. "Others like me would tell you that you have an exaggerated sense of your importance for that question. For beings like me, someone like you," Naruto said, while taking a little more of his ramen, chewing and tasting its flavor, before swallowing it and looking at the nervous black-haired man and continuing to think about what you would feel if a bacteria sat at your table and acted funny. Sasuke couldn't help but sweat because of his nerves, which only increased with each word the black-haired man said, which gave him horrible chills. "This is a small planet, in a tiny solar system, in a galaxy that's just leaving diapers. You should know, Sasuke. I'm old, very old. And I invite you to contemplate how insignificant you are to beings like me." Naruto finished with a more serious and firm tone, focusing his attention back on his ramen, completely ignoring Sasuke. He was processing all the information contained in the black-haired man's words, which did nothing but confuse him and cause him intrigue. Especially the part about beings like him. Were there more like Naruto? Or rather, what the hell was Naruto in the first place? Also, if other beings saw them as nothing, how did Naruto see them? Did he also see them all as nothing, or did he see them in a different way? He couldn't understand anything. While this conversation was taking place, outside the premises, the sky had completely darkened, while it began to rain heavily and loud thunder could be heard throughout the sky. "I must ask, how old are you?" the Uchiha asked, managing to get out of his thoughts and gather enough courage to ask that question. "The same as God." "No, I correct myself, in fact, I'm older than him, at this point I can't remember exactly. Life, death, chicken, egg? Whatever. In the end, I devoured him too," the black-haired man finished, continuing to eat his ramen with all the calm in the world. All this, without realizing the effect of his words on the Uchiha, who had an expression of complete and utter shock and terror plastered on his face. He looked at Naruto as if he were the greatest monster that ever existed, desperately searching for something that would indicate that what he was saying was a lie or exaggeration. But he found nothing. What he said was 100% the truth. Did he eat God? How is he older than him? Damn it, what the hell is he? The terrified black-haired man thought, unable to stop his body from shaking in fear, while he kept sweating. At the same time he wondered why he was telling him all that. Was he bragging, or did he simply want to intimidate him? Because if it was the latter, he had succeeded. Naruto, meanwhile, finally finished eating his ramen, completely ignoring the Uchiha's state of pure terror. He stood up and began walking towards the exit of the restaurant, but not before stopping in front of the door and looking over his shoulder at Sasuke. "I have some unfinished business with someone, enjoy the time you have left," he said before opening the door and finally leaving. Although Sasuke could swear that in his voice there was a small sadness and regret, which the blue-eyed man seemed to be trying to hide. On the other hand, Hinata had left her home a few minutes after returning. Her mind was in complete and utter chaos. She couldn't believe that the boy was Naruto. It was simply impossible, and she knew it better than anyone. Therefore, she just told her father and sister that she would go out for a while. This confused them both, but Hayashi allowed it, only telling her not to take too long, as a strong storm was approaching, but his eldest daughter didn't even pay attention, running away as fast as she could, barely hearing the adult give her permission. Currently, the black-haired girl was running through the empty streets of her village, with no intention of stopping, noticing how not even the umbus or ninjas were there, something that seemed strange to her, since she didn't believe that they would hide just because of a storm. But she decided to ignore that detail, having all her attention on getting to a place that only she knew. After a few minutes, the Hyuga arrived at the entrance to the Forest of Death, the same forest that was used for the Chunin exams due to how dangerous it was, which is why access to it was prohibited. However, this did not matter at all to Hinata, who jumped into the forest, beginning to go deeper and deeper into it, while the rain was present throughout the village, along with the light and sound of lightning and thunder, respectively. "That boy can't be Naruto, I'm absolutely sure of that," she told herself, while she jumped at full speed between the branches of the trees, looking for a specific place. All this, while a series of memories came to his mind. How she and Naruto were inseparable, they did almost everything together, they trained, walked around the village, went to eat together, and everything was wonderful for the Hyuga. But there was something that bothered her a lot, and it was the fact that Naruto only saw her as a sister, which was not the case with her. She was deeply in love with the black-haired boy. For that reason, she hated that her boyfriend didn't see her as a woman, that he didn't reciprocate her feelings, even though she was always there for him. After a few minutes, Hinata finally found the place she was looking for, and grabbed a large branch that was nearby, beginning to dig into the ground in total desperation. While the storm grew stronger, thunder could be heard everywhere. A specific memory came to the girl's mind as she continued digging. A memory where Naruto called her to talk to her about something important. That day the boy looked nervous and very blushed. That was very unusual for him, which filled Hinata with hope and excitement, believing that the boy she was in love with was finally going to confess his love to her. But the reality was different. "Hinata, I need your help. There's a girl I like and I don't know how to approach her. I thought you could give me some advice to, well, get her to notice me," said the black-haired man with a big blush on his face, trying to seem tough, despite how embarrassed he looked about the subject. At those words, the black-haired girl's mind stopped completely, while she felt her heart break into 1,000 pieces. The boy she had a crush on was interested in another girl, and even though she was always there for him, supporting him at every turn, she just couldn't understand him. His chest hurt, but that pain turned into rage. Anger and desperation blinded the Hyuga, and the next thing she knew, she was in front of Naruto's body, who was no longer breathing and had his face completely disfigured and bloody, while little by little a pool of blood appeared around his head. Hinata looked in complete horror as her hands were now stained with the blood of the boy she loved. Her eyes were wide open, not believing what she had done. He had let himself be carried away by anger, jealousy and despair, and that was why he ended up taking the life of the person he loved most. She was terrified. She knew that if people found out about this, they would send her to prison for life. Not even being the heiress of an important clan would save her from having murdered the Jinchuriki of the village. It was more than obvious that it would be her end. The best Hinata could do was to hide it and pretend that Naruto had disappeared. And that's what brings us to this situation. Hinata finished digging, and there it was. Naruto's putrefied corpse. The sight of it was disgusting. The rotten flesh mixed with the mud, the bones were clearly visible, and the disgusting smell emanating from the body. The Hyuga couldn't help it and started crying because of that disturbing and disgusting sight, feeling her stomach turn. unable to contain herself any longer and vomiting to the side. She stayed like that for a couple of minutes, until she finally managed to calm down, turning her gaze full of fear and confusion to the putrefied corpse. This doesn't make sense. If Naruto is here. Who is that guy? The girl didn't understand anything that was happening. The days after she ended up accidentally killing her beloved, the guilt had been eating away at her every second, having horrible nightmares where Naruto appeared to her and blamed her for his death. But the worst came when, a couple of weeks after his death, he turned up alive, walking through the streets of the village as if nothing was happening. And, as if this wasn't strange enough, it was that no one had noticed the boy's absence during those days when he was dead, and it was also strange that no one had seen her when she went to the forest in the first place to hide the body. Nothing about that situation made the slightest sense. At that moment, a huge bolt of lightning lit up the entire sky, causing the girl to jump in fright, closing her eyes for a single moment. But when she opened them again, the corpse had disappeared, causing her to open her eyes in the deepest horror and despair, unable to understand anything. What? How the hell did it disappear? This can't be a trick, or really, it can't just be a genjutsu? The girl screamed desperately and hysterically, searching the ground for something, anything, but she found nothing. Even that disgusting smell had disappeared. It was as if the corpse had never existed. And then, Hinata. A huge, horrible shiver ran through the Hyuga's entire body when she heard that eerie whisper just a centimeter from her ear. Her skin turned pale with fear, while tears kept flowing, as if her own body was trying to tell her that the worst of monsters was behind her. Despite that horrible and primordial fear she felt, her body moved on its own, turning and looking at no one but Naruto himself, who looked at her with that neutral and empty expression. And Naruto? The girl asked, terrified, her body shaking like jelly, while her mind couldn't process everything that was happening. And no, you're not Naruto. Who the buck are you? What are you supposed to be? The girl had screamed in desperation and terror, trying to move to escape and get away from whatever that thing was with the appearance of the boy she loved. Despite Hinata's screams, the black-haired man didn't change his expression in the slightest, staring fixedly at the Hyuga heiress, being less than a meter away from her. Disgusting was the word that came out of the black-haired man's mouth, making Hinata confused and look him in the eyes, trying to know what he meant by that. You are simply disgusting. Variant. The real Hinata would never do such disgusting actions. You make me sick. Those words were spoken in a neutral and empty tone, just like the expression he had at all times. But if one looked closely, one could notice a slight tone of disappointment and sadness hidden within. That was not the case with Hinata, who only got very angry at those words from the black-haired man, not being able to contain herself any longer because of everything that was happening. What the buck do you know? I was always there for Naruto, and he never looked at me. I was willing to do anything for him, but he decided to go with some random girl. He was supposed to be mine. He didn't need anyone but me. Hinata screamed at the top of her lungs in the rain, completely furious, while a sickly smile slowly appeared on her face. She wanted to hit that boy who dared to pretend to be her lover until he regretted having approached her, but her own body couldn't move even a millimeter. For his part, Naruto was not fazed in the slightest by the girl's words and unhinged smile, who was now showing her true self out of fear and desperation, being just a crazy woman who was completely obsessed with her boyfriend, to a totally sick level. Without saying anything, the boy placed his hands on the Hyuga's shoulders, making her look at him confused. But soon, that confusion turned to fear when they saw strange cracks appearing all over the boy's face and head, which slowly opened in an inhuman and grotesque way, revealing enormous jaws with huge, sharp teeth. By this point, the girl had urinated herself from fear, crying from helplessness at seeing how her end was near, and in her final moments, the image of her beloved came to her mind, remembering those years she lived happily by his side, only regretting that he had never noticed her. And narrate. Hinata couldn't finish speaking when those monstrous jaws ended up tearing her head off with a mere bite, decapitating her and ending her life. The now decapitated body of the Hyuga fell to the ground, while in the silent forest you could hear the deformed and sharp teeth of that creature crushing the bones and flesh of the head, before swallowing it, and returning its head to normal. Only, with one exception, being that now, instead of Naruto's face, one could see some kind of amorphous mass of flesh, devoid of any human features or appearance. This variant was very unpleasant. But it doesn't matter, next time, it will be better, that creature would say, before surrounding itself with a brilliant aura of a beautiful pure white color. And in less than 1,000th of a second, everything was consumed by light. Waiting for your 𝕨𝕬𝕐𝕗 for you. Sasuke Uchiha was confused. He didn't know where he was or how he had gotten there. All he knew was that everything was blurry, his head was spinning, and at the same time his whole body felt light as a feather. It was a strange sensation. Slowly, his vision began to clear on its own. A strong light hit his eyes, forcing him to close them again. He quickly covered his eyes with his hands, slowly opening his eyes, this time managing to get used to the light. Once his vision cleared completely, he was able to realize where he was. He found himself in a beautiful meadow of flowers. The sky above him was completely blue, without a single cloud, allowing the beautiful rays of sunlight to be seen, which illuminated the entire place, giving it an even more beautiful touch. However, contrasting with that beautiful view, those flowers emitted a disgusting smell of rotten meat, as if that beautiful view was trying to disguise the disgusting truth that that place hid. At that, the Uchiha realized something. In the middle of that field, there was a small hill, and on it, there was a person, with his back to him. No one said anything, that person didn't move or introduce himself. But like a puzzle that completed itself, without Sasuke having any real interest, just by seeing that figure he knew. He knew exactly who it was. The greatest prodigy in the entire village of Konoha. The cold and calculating boy who hid his true self behind an idiot boy mask. And Naruto, was the soft whisper that came from the lips of the confused Uchiha. She didn't know what was happening, she didn't understand what that place was or why she was there, she also didn't understand why the mere image of the blonde man made her shiver horribly. Just by seeing his back, every part of her being was screaming for her to escape as quickly as possible. Just as when a prey is facing a predator, its instincts warn it of the imminent danger. Sasuke's mind was in chaos, and he couldn't realize what was happening in front of his eyes. Those weren't flowers. It was a field of death. The black-haired man opened his eyes in horror, realizing that those beautiful flowers were actually corpses. His eyes widened in complete shock at such a grotesque scene. He could feel the blood of the bodies staining his feet and the smell of putrefaction growing 100 times stronger. Among that enormous and infinite ocean of death, he could still see Naruto's figure. The blonde still had his back to him, while the sunlight bathed him, being completely alone, in that mountain of corpses. Sasuke could barely identify the bodies, most of them being people he knew, like his classmates at the ninja academy. Sakura, Ino, Shikamaru, Kiba, Hinata, and those were just some of the ones he could recognize because some were in such a deplorable state that it was simply impossible for him to find any distinctive feature about their identity. Suddenly, the entire place began to shake, as if it were at the epicenter of a powerful earthquake. Sasuke couldn't say anything, when a huge amount of cracks began to appear everywhere, as if reality itself were fragmenting, as if it were nothing more than a fragile and thin glass. With great fear and panic, he tried to run, to escape in any direction, but it was impossible. His body did not respond, he was not able to move even a single finger, all while he saw how those cracks were reaching towards his position. Without him being able to do anything, the ground beneath him broke into thousands of pieces, revealing a huge dark abyss, a darkness into which the young Uchiha ended up falling, only being able to extend his hand as he screamed in terror, feeling that darkness envelop him as if it were a grotesque and cold embrace. Until there was no longer a single trace of light. Sasuke Uchiha let out a cry of horror, shooting up from his bed. His eyes were as wide as biologically possible, his breathing was labored and uneven, while cold sweat poured down his mind. He quickly realized that he was in his room, instantly understanding that it was all nothing more than a nightmare. How horrible! The Uchiha murmured, even though he was completely frightened by that experience, everything had felt so real. He'd had nightmares before, but none of them compared to this one, not even in the slightest. He felt like he'd actually been in that field of death and corpses. Besides, why was Naruto there in the first place? It didn't make sense. All of this, without a doubt, seemed too strange and suspicious to him. Even though his mind was flooded with doubts, the black-haired man left his room and went to the kitchen, meeting his parents and siblings, who were already having breakfast. "Good morning," he greeted them with a small smile, while sitting next to his older brother. "Good morning, brother. It's obvious that you were tired from yesterday's training. I had to wake you up by throwing water on you any more," Itachi would say jokingly, rubbing his brother's hair, who only rolled his eyes at the older man's words. Mikoto would feed her youngest son his breakfast, while everyone ate and chatted calmly, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere they had that day. Despite the pleasant family atmosphere, Sasuke was still lost in his thoughts about that nightmare. Something told him that this wasn't the first time something like that had happened. It was like a strange déjà vu. A part of him wanted to simply forget all that and continue with his day, but another, even bigger part of him had the desire to find out what that strange event was about. However, he had to come out of his thoughts when he heard his father's voice. "Tell me, Sasuke, how has your training been going?" the patriarch of the family asked with a serious look. Well, it's been going well. I've been progressing a lot with my lightning jutsus, but I'm having some difficulty with the fire ones," explained the youngest of the family. "I see. Well, if you have any problems, you can ask your brother for help. I'm sure Itachi would be more than happy to help you, right?" The adult's serious and sharp gaze fell on his eldest son, who rolled his eyes at this, giving the leader of the Uchiha clan a bored look. "Nah, forget it, old man. You know I've already retired from all that ninja shit," the black-haired man replied vaguely, making Fugaku frown at his eldest son's attitude. Sasuke sweated nervously at this, knowing what was about to happen, noticing the clear look of annoyance and frustration present on his father's face. "Hey, I'm not hungry. Actually, I forgot I have something to do. See you," the black-haired man would say quickly, grabbing a toast before quickly leaving the house. Mikoto hadn't had time to say anything to her youngest son, but she still sighed heavily, knowing it was better if he wasn't present. The tension in the place was quick to become present, as Fugaku and Itachi's gazes collided. "Itachi, I know you're not interested in anything that has to do with shinobi, but you're wasting your talent and your brother's as well," the man growled, staring at his son. "So what? I don't see the problem. In fact, I would be much happier if Sasuke decided to leave all this crap of being a ninja. He would be much happier that way," the black-haired man responded calmly, not giving in at any moment to the disapproving look from his father. Mikoto shook her head internally, still not understanding why her eldest son acted like that. It all started a couple of years ago, the same night the Uchiha clan was about to stage a coup. Just hours before the big attack, Hiruzen asked to have a meeting with her and Fugaku. Apparently, the Hokage had realized the unfair treatment he and the village were giving his clan. The old man was more than aware of how beneficial it was to have the Uchiha clan on his side, especially because of the immense power that the Sharingan had, so losing them would mean losing an enormous military resource of great importance, so he decided to reach an agreement. When everyone was gathered, Hiruzen told Fugaku that they had been thinking and realized that the Uchihas were too isolated, and that it was a mistake to have placed them in a corner of the village. At the end of the meeting, Hiruzen ended up not only returning the entire clan to its original position, but also giving Fugaku full control of the military police, as well as an important position on the council, giving his clan importance in high-level decisions. Fugaku did not hesitate to accept this proposal, and with this, the coup d'état they had planned was cancelled. What's more, the clan was extremely happy with this news, as they felt that they were finally being given the respect they deserved. But not everything was happiness. That same night, something in Itachi had changed. He looked more dull. The next thing they knew, he had resigned from the ANBU the next day and abandoned his ninja activities, basically being a civilian now. This news had left the entire clan in shock, as they were all aware that Itachi was a complete prodigy, having a great future as a shinobi, so they did not understand why he had decided to throw his entire future and ninja career away from one second to the next. When asked why he had done this, he simply replied, "Being a ninja is stupid and a waste of time, If they want to throw their lives away, it's their problem. This had greatly upset Fugaku, as he could not accept that his son wasted his great talent in that way. Since that day, the relationship between the two had become very tense, having several constant arguments, like the one now. You had a bright future, Itachi. You are wasting your talent, the family patriarch said harshly. Oh sure, I can be a shinobi and ruin my life. But hey, I'm taking advantage of my talent, the black-haired man exclaimed with a mocking smile, not caring about his own father's words. You are making our clan look ridiculous. What kind of example do you think you are giving your brother with this childish behavior? The adult would say with a little more annoyance at his son's attitude. At this, Itachi opened his eyes and looked at his father with a mixture of mockery and indignation. Example? Ha, look who's talking, the black-haired man exclaimed, standing up and looking at his two parents with a hard expression. But without leaving the mockery aside, tell me, father, what kind of example would you be giving to Sasuke? Should I remind you that you were the ones who came up with the fantastic idea of planning a coup against the village? If it weren't for the actions of the Hokage, you would have been the leader and cause of a civil war. Of course you are an excellent example for Sasuke. Without a doubt he should follow in your footsteps. Itachi's words denoted mockery towards his parents' actions, calling them out for those actions from years ago. At this, both adults put on extremely serious faces, with Fugaku also standing up and activating his Manjikyu Sharingan, which began to spin in a threatening manner. You won't say anything to Sasuke, understood? It wasn't a question, and everyone knew it. Oh no, a Manjikyu, what am I going to do? The black-haired man exclaimed mockingly, before activating his own Manjikyu in the same way I have one too. You old geezer, don't think you'll be able to intimidate me with something like that. The tension between them only increased, so Makoto stood up and spoke, drawing both of their attention. You better calm down, there's no reason for you to keep arguing. She looked seriously at her husband. Once both of them deactivated their eyes, Fugaku, we already talked about this. I don't agree with Itachi's decision either, but it's his life and you can't direct every decision he makes. The man just growled in frustration at this, still not accepting his son's decision, not understanding how he was able to throw his future away, having such talent. For his part, Itachi just rolled his eyes at this, heading for the exit before his mother could say anything. I'm leaving, I'll go see Izumi. Itachi stopped at the door, turning to look at his father with a mocking and confident smile. By the way, father, if I were you I wouldn't use your Manjikyu so much. You don't want to go blind, do you? After saying that, Itachi walked out and closed the door, leaving his father quite angry. Once outside his home, he would let out a sigh of exhaustion from having to go through another argument with his old father, but he decided to ignore it. However, he would see his brother walking away, so he would decide to approach him. Are you okay, Sasuke? I asked him, taking him by surprise. Yeah, I'm fine, the younger one said simply, having a somewhat downcast and thoughtful look, something that was noticed by his brother. Come on, don't try to fool me. I can read you like an open book. Tell me what's going on, he insisted. Don't you regret having abandoned your career as a shinobi? No, not even a little. In fact, I can assure you that it was the best decision of my entire life, Itachi answered, his gaze and the tone of his voice not showing even a hint of doubt. He was completely telling the truth. But before you were respected by the entire village and the clan, I don't understand. Why did you throw your whole future away? The older black-haired man would only let out a sigh at this. Sasuke was questioning him the same as with his father. Although he couldn't blame him, he knew he had to make things clear to him. Yes, being a strong shinobi can bring the respect of others, but only that. The voice of the eldest changed to a tired one, and that denoted a certain contempt for the title shinobi, something that caught Sasuke's attention a lot. Being a ninja implies walking the path of pain and death every day of your life. You will see your companions and family die in horrible ways. You will carry traumas for the rest of your life. Being unable to forget them, you will not be able to have friends, since they will die in some mission or could even betray the village, and you would have to kill them. Sasuke, if you want to have friends, start a family or even reach an adulthood. Then, never become shinobi, because by doing so, you are ceasing to be human and becoming a simple disposable tool, and tools cannot have life. The image of a certain Uchiha, who was like a brother to him, passed through the black-haired man's mind. The one who died for the village, to stop the coup d'état. And in the end, their sacrifice meant nothing, because the coup was called off. It was all for nothing. Itachi snapped out of his thoughts, noticing the shocked and slightly scared look on Sasuke's face. Realizing what he had done, he patted his head, ruffling his hair. Relax, in the end the decision is yours, you know that your brother will support you in whatever you choose, she said, smiling calmly and warmly, managing to reassure the younger a little. Now then, I have to go, I'll go see Izumi. And by the way, fix your hair, it looks like you have a duck's butt on your head, she would say mockingly, before leaving. The younger Uchiha had a small vein appear on his forehead at his brother's last words, watching him leave until he lost sight of him. Even as he walked aimlessly, he couldn't help but think about the words she said to him. Walking down the path of pain and death, the miner thought, when suddenly, his thoughts were cut off as the image of that sea of corpses suddenly came to his mind, causing a horrible chill to run through his mind. He still couldn't understand what that had been, he wanted to forget it, tell himself that it was just a nightmare, nothing more. But he couldn't, his own being told him that there was something very big hidden behind this, and that Naruto had something to do with it. It would be best if I just forget about this, besides, what am I supposed to do? I don't have any clues or anything to start investigating. I just know that that idiot is involved in all this. But I don't think he'll tell me anything. I'd love to be able to just get into his head and find out what he's hiding. But that's impossible. It's not like there's a rare jutsu that allows me to get into someone's mind. Hi Sasuke, what a coincidence. I didn't know you'd be here, a female voice that the black-haired man knew perfectly would say. He quickly turned around, meeting Ino Yamanaka, that girl who was one of his main fangirls, who followed him everywhere. A member of the Yamanaka clan, daughter of the leader, and who possesses jutsus that are mainly based on invading or affecting the minds of others in some way. The blonde-haired girl had gone to the Uchiha district in order to meet her crush, accidentally, and asked him out. However, she looked on in complete confusion as the black-haired boy looked at her with a small smile. Hey, is something wrong, Sasuke? Before she knew it, the Uchiha was already in front of her. Ino, I need a favor from you, the black-haired man exclaimed seriously, making the young blonde blush. Sure, what favor would that be? By chance, do you have a jutsu from your clan that can get me inside someone's mind? Several minutes later, both young men were in one of the many training camps that the village had, hiding in some trees, watching how a certain blonde with marks on his cheeks was sleeping under the shade of a tree. Let me see if I understand. Do you want me to use one of my jutsus so you can enter Naruto's mind? The blonde Yamanaka asked, very confused. Yes, basically. And why do you want to get into his mind? She raised an eyebrow, looking confused at her crush. Although she was happy to be able to spend time with him, his request was something extremely strange. I have to find out something, the Uchiha answered vaguely, earning a suspicious look from Ino. Look, I can't tell you what it is, but I promise it's nothing bad. I'll just go in, get what I want and leave. I won't do anything to hurt him or anything like that. Ino looked at him seriously for a few seconds, before letting out a soft sigh. Okay, I'll help you. Recently, I learned a jutsu that allows me to take people into the minds of others and see their memories. Is that enough? Yes, really, thank you very much, Ino, Sasuke would say, having a small smile on his face, a smile which made the blonde blush. Okay, but you'll owe me a favor after this. Now, put your hand on my shoulder. Sasuke did as the girl asked, watching as she began to make several seals with her hands, before finishing and pointing both hands towards the sleeping blonde. The next thing the black-haired man felt was as if he was fainting, closing his eyes while his body and Ino's were supported between the branches of the tree. Slowly, Sasuke opened his eyes, feeling his head spinning and his body feeling strange, as if he were floating in a huge ocean. Hey, what happened? The Uchiha wondered, as he stood up, realizing that he was in a kind of enormous white hallway, which had several golden decorations, giving the place an elegant and imposing appearance. But what stood out most about the hallway were the various paintings that were everywhere. The boy stood up, approaching one of the paintings, seeing how in it was the figure of Naruto, along with his team, which was Hinata Hyuga and Kiba Inozuka. and below the painting were the words, "Formation of Team 9." "What the hell is this?" I exclaimed, confused. "You know perfectly well where we are," Sasuke Ino's voice called him from behind, making him turn around. Finding the blonde a few meters away from him, "We are in Naruto's mind, just as you asked, remember?" The girl looked at the black-haired man's surprised expression with an amused smile. She didn't blame him. Traveling to a mind was a confusing experience, to say the least. In fact, she had been just as confused as he had been when she first performed her mind transfer jutsu. The Yamanaka's words seemed to make Sasuke react, who blushed in embarrassment, coughing into his hand to avoid making himself look even more ridiculous. "True," it was obvious he would say, disguising his embarrassment with seriousness, to the blonde's amusement. "It's strange, I never imagined a mind could look like that," he would say with curiosity and intrigue, looking at the details of the large hallway. "That's normal, mental landscapes reflect the individual. I studied a lot about these topics," Ino explained with some pride for her knowledge, "but well, now you can search for what you wanted. I recommend not touching anything. A person's mind can be very fragile. Oh, and be careful not to let Naruto's inner self discover you." "Inner self?" "It's like his conscience. It would be best if he doesn't discover us, or we could get into trouble," the blonde Yamanaka warned seriously. Sasuke nodded in affirmation, beginning to search through the paintings for something that could explain that strange nightmare he had, while Ino simply looked at some paintings, waiting for the black-haired man to finish searching. As the black-haired boy looked at the paintings, he could identify several scenarios from Naruto's life, one where he went to the ninja academy, one of the many scenarios where he used his role as a dumb idiot to hide his true cold and calculating self. In addition to others that did not attract much attention, but most of them were either eating ramen at his favorite place, or training on his own. But then, something caught his attention. It was a sound, a childish one. It was crying? Approaching the source of the sound, he found something that left him completely surprised. It was Naruto, or at least, a Naruto of about 6 years old, who was sitting near a pillar, hugging his legs, hiding his face in them, crying inconsolably. Little Naruto quickly noticed his presence, so he stopped crying, standing up and lifting his face, letting the Uchiha see his fearful expression and rivers of tears falling down his cheeks. "And Naruto?" Both Sasuke and Ino had spoken at the same time. Immediately, the Uchiha turned towards the blonde, finding that a few meters away from her was the dark silhouette of Naruto, only this time, he was her age. Seeing that silhouette, a horrible chill ran through Sasuke's body, to the point where he felt his legs shaking like jelly. His instincts went crazy, telling him that he had to escape as quickly as possible. In the presence of this being, the child Naruto ran away, escaping as fast as he could. "Oh Naruto, this is not what you think. I mean, we are in your mind, look, it's a long story. But we weren't doing anything wrong, really," the Yamanaka said quickly, clearly nervous about being caught with the black-haired man. However, the Uchiha noticed that behind that dark silhouette, there was the blonde boy, who had an expression of great fear and worry, quickly shaking his head, indicating that they should not approach that thing. To the black-haired man's further horror, he saw how the silhouette began to deform, revealing a large number of eyes shining an intense white color, along with several mouths full of extremely sharp teeth. Ino, the black-haired man, shouted in alert, running towards his partner, pushing her to the side, watching as a large, grotesque hand with enormous claws dug into the ground where the blonde had previously been. The two young men rolled across the floor towards one of the walls of the corridor. But instead of crashing into it and feeling the coldness of the bricks, they ended up going through it as if it were a thin and fragile piece of paper, beginning to fall into a huge dark abyss. The two screamed in fear at the fall, with Sasuke being the first to react, seeing a branch of a large tree in the distance. Taking Ino in his arms, he went to that branch, using all his strength to hold on to it. But due to the speed and force of the fall, it ended up breaking, causing the two to roll down the trunk of the tree, until they finally reached the ground. "Are you okay?" Sasuke asked, clutching his wrist in pain, feeling like he was about to break it. "Yes, thank you very much," Ino replied, standing up next to the black-haired boy. "Where are we?" They both watched in complete shock as they found themselves in a sort of copy of Konoha's village, only this one was filled with a large number of gray, dry trees surrounding all the buildings, as well as several blood stains everywhere, and as if that wasn't enough, the whole place had a gloomy atmosphere, almost seeming like everything was in different shades of gray. Just like in the hallway, there were many paintings in that place, which represented Naruto's memories. Said paintings were hung on the dry trunks of the trees. But unlike the others, these paintings looked extremely old and worn, having large scratch marks, which had torn off a large part of the image, preventing one from clearly seeing what they were about. "I think we're in Naruto's real mind," the Uchiha would say in amazement, as he watched in the sky, how a kind of hole was regenerating quickly, this being where they had fallen. "What do you mean by that?" "That hallway was," Ino said, very confused by the whole situation, before opening her eyes in surprise. "They were false memories? But it's impossible, there can't be false memories in a mind." "Forget about it, what's more, can there be two inner beings in someone's mind?" Sasuke asked, having all his attention on that deformed monstrosity that almost killed them. They both knew that Naruto was the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Practically the entire village knew it. But this was nothing like a giant nine-tailed fox. They felt that it was something much worse than that bijou. "No. But I've read about emotions that become so strong that they materialize. We have to stay safe. If we die in this place, our minds will be destroyed and our bodies will be left empty. It's like brain death," the blonde Yamanaka explained, increasingly worried about what was happening. "Very well, the best thing would be for us to leave right now. I think it's more than clear that there's something very wrong with Naruto." "No, we can't leave yet, we just entered his real mind. Look at this place, I won't get another chance like this. If I'm going to find answers, I have to do it now." Despite the situation, Sasuke wasn't willing to back down. He knew it was risky, but he refused to leave Naruto's mind until he got answers. Ino looked at the boy as if he were completely crazy, but before she could say anything, they both heard the leaves of some nearby bushes moving, which alerted them both. Before they could be on guard, they saw the little 6-year-old blonde boy shyly emerge from between the leaves, staring at them. "It's you, Kid Naruto," the Uchiha exclaimed in surprise, approaching the little boy, all while Ino looked in amazement at the presence of that young Naruto. "Thank you for helping us. You don't seem as scary as your inner self," she said in a calm voice, not wanting to scare him, as she knelt down to his height. At that, a huge and terrifying roar was heard throughout the place, shaking that copy of Konoha, scaring the boy a lot, who hid behind Sasuke, as if seeking refuge from that monster that lived in his mind. If strong emotions can take form, then it could be, "I don't know, his fault?" said the black-haired man, unsure of what emotion the little one could represent, while looking at his partner. "What? But what could Naruto have done to feel such strong guilt?" the kunoichi would say doubtfully, since she hardly knew anything about the blonde boy. "Well, whatever it is, it can help keep us safe. And maybe you can show us what Naruto is hiding," the Uchiha asked the young blonde, receiving a silent nod from him. "Wait, what?" Ino couldn't say anything else, when the three of them heard that powerful roar of the monster, only this time it was heard closer. "There's no time, run," he shouted to his partner, while the three of them began to run, being guided by the child Naruto. Neither of the two young men knew exactly where to go to escape, but they were surprised when little Naruto entered one of the many paintings in that gloomy and desolate place. Before both of them saw it, the little boy entered the painting, immersing himself in it as if it were simple water. "Wait, we're going to enter his memories? Do you have any idea how dangerous that is?" the blonde exclaimed almost hysterically. But another ferocious roar echoed loudly throughout the place, further upsetting both of them. "Fool, it's a way to survive," Sasuke said, taking her by the hand and pulling them both into the memory. In less than a second, the two boys felt themselves falling to the ground. Realizing that they were in the blonde's memory, they quickly got up, watching as Kid Naruto ran at full speed. Without hesitation, they stood up and followed him, only to be met with a scene that made their blood run cold. Konoha. Destroyed. Where once stood one of the 5 great ninja villages, there was now nothing but a pile of rubble. Even the mount of the Hokage's faces was destroyed, now only being a mountain half the size of what it once was. "What is this?" Ino exclaimed in shock, covering her mouth as she looked in horror at that gloomy scene. Sasuke didn't say anything. His eyes were as wide as they could be. He couldn't understand anything. How did Naruto have such a memory? There was no logic to it. This all seemed to be nothing more than another horrible nightmare. But he realized something that completely caught his attention. Look at that, she called to her partner, pointing at something. This seemed to be a person, who was standing in the middle of all the destruction. Without a second's hesitation, both of them ran towards that figure, hoping to get more answers. As he got closer, his eyes widened, staring in shock as the person was Naruto, but this was an adult Naruto, around 20 or 25 years old. His hair was a mess, reaching his shoulders, and he even had a beard, equally unkempt. When they looked into his eyes, a horrible chill ran through them both. Those eyes had no sign of life, they were completely empty, without any light, as they looked at what was once their village. He didn't say anything, he didn't move a single finger, he just stood there, staring into space. That sight of the blonde ninja was simply chilling and even terrifying for both of them. It was like seeing a corpse walking among the living. Naruto looked dead inside. Something that only the Uchiha could notice was that one of the adult's fingers, more specifically, the thumb of his right hand, had a very strange appearance. It looked as if it was rotting. In a way, it reminded him of the appearance of that monster that was chasing them. Sasuke and Ino stared at the adult for what seemed like hours, waiting for him to do something, until he finally moved. The blonde raised his head to the night ground, his empty and dead eyes staring at the stars, as if he had realized something. Following his gaze, both young people saw strange lights appear in the sky. It was as if 3 stars were falling to earth. There they come. It was the soft whisper that came from the blonde's dry lips. That voice made them both shudder. It was a hoarse, empty voice that sounded tired, something they simply wouldn't expect to see in Naruto Uzumaki. At that, the adult's body was surrounded by a strange golden flaming aura. It was as if his own body was on fire, only they weren't burning him, in addition to several black spheres floating behind him. This kind of transformation left them both astonished, since, despite being only a memory, they could feel that this form had great power. And as if this wasn't enough, Naruto flexed his legs, taking a great leap into the sky, before starting to fly towards those lights at full speed, looking like some kind of golden comet. A few seconds later, the sky began to rumble with loud explosions that shook everything in their path. This alerted both of them, so they decided to run towards the tree and enter the painting, abandoning that memory. Once out of the memory, they were both breathing heavily, their eyes showing complete fear and bewilderment at what they had just seen. What the hell was that? How is it possible that Naruto has memories like that? None of this makes sense, Ino screamed hysterically. Even though shinobi are trained to keep control of their emotions, this time she couldn't control herself. Everything was so surreal and bizarre that she simply couldn't help but scream. No. I don't know was the only thing Sasuke could say, being just as scared and confused as the blonde Yamanaka. But to the horror of both, they saw some kind of grotesque tentacles come out of the painting they were in before. He found us, run, Ino screamed, terrified. Without hesitation, they both ran as fast as they could, watching as the child Naruto reappeared, entering another painting, not hesitating to follow him and enter that memory, all in order to escape from that monster. Inside that memory, everything was too strange. The landscape was unlike any place they had ever seen. The sky was purple and the terrain looked rocky and without any trace of soil or plant life for miles. What the hell is this place? Ino would say confused, looking at that strange landscape. Wait, Sasuke would say, drawing her attention. He would signal for her to be quiet, hearing a somewhat strange sound in the distance. Following that strange sound, the 2 young men climbed a small mountain that was nearby, and upon reaching the top, they saw what could simply be described as a massacre. They were a long way away, several meters, hundreds of meters, but even so, they could see, with difficulty, but they could. But what they could see was hundreds of people fighting against something they simply couldn't see. Those people had a very strange appearance. The only thing they could see clearly was that these people were completely white, both their clothes and their skin, and some were flying. All around the place were a great number of corpses torn apart in horrible ways, limbs everywhere grotesquely adorning the battlefield, while blood filled the ground. The enemy that the people were facing moved at such speed that all that could be seen was a blur, to the point where wherever it passed, it left a trail of destruction and death. Not to mention the large amount of smoke that it raised, making it even more difficult to see. But for a brief moment, Sasuke managed to see how the subject's arm emerged from the smoke, showing his appearance, and it was horrible. Even though it was only his arm, he could see that it was in an advanced state of putrefaction. His flesh was simply disgusting. In some parts it had even fallen off, revealing part of his bones, and even some of his nerves hung in the air like loose threads. That sight made Sasuke's stomach turn with enormous disgust, to the point where he had to cover his mouth with both hands to avoid vomiting. Knowing that they had nothing more to do with each other, he took Ino by the arm and both left that memory, returning to that twisted version of Konoha, along with the little boy Naruto, who had appeared out of nowhere. This is getting out of control. First, a memory of Naruto as an adult alone in the middle of the destroyed village, when in reality he is only 13 years old, and now a battlefield. What am I supposed to think about all this? Ino exclaimed desperately. The whole situation was taking her to her mental limit. I knew there was something behind that dream, but I didn't think I would end up encountering something like this, Sasuke said, wiping the sweat from his forehead because of the nerves he felt. But this achievement saw how the child Naruto was watching them, standing a few meters in front of him, looking at them sadly. You tell us what all this means, he demanded to know, before the entire place shook from a powerful roar, one they knew perfectly well. By reflex, he turned around, seeing with complete horror how that monster was just meters away from both of them. Without hesitation, Ino and Sasuke ran as fast as their legs could carry them, beginning to follow the young blonde, who ran towards a kind of forest. Taking advantage of the trees, they had planned to use them to lose sight of the monster, and they were succeeding, since it seemed to have lost sight of them, beginning to destroy everything in its path with its enormous claws and some kind of tentacles made of rotten meat. They knew he would find them soon, so they would have to enter a new memory, and luckily, they found him. A huge tree located deep in that dark and dry forest, with an old and deteriorated painting on the trunk. They did not hesitate for a single second and entered it, just at the moment when the creature was about to turn in that direction. The moment the two young men entered that new memory, they knew something was wrong. Especially when they saw how they were floating in an infinite white void. There was no ground, no houses, no walls, no people. The only thing in that place was total and absolute nothingness. Well, except for someone. In the distance, they could see a humanoid silhouette. Its features could not be seen clearly, but they knew perfectly well who it was. At this point, either of them dared to approach. They were scared, very scared, and confused. At that, despite the distance they were at, the silhouette began to speak and its voice resonated loudly throughout the place. An ancient, primordial voice, older than existence itself, a voice that reflected nothing but anger and frustration. I'm getting tired. This was just another disgusting failed attempt. They were all disgusting. Why do my precious creations keep coming out so defective? It hurts me to see them reduced to those beings. Especially him. Sasuke. My friend. Why does he keep remembering? Slowly, that silhouette began to deform into inhuman and grotesque shapes, while increasing in size more and more, showing no sign of stopping. It doesn't matter. I've already come so far, I don't plan on stopping. I'm going to achieve my goal, and nothing will stand in my way. Immediately, Sasuke and Ino would come out of that memory, even with the image of that grotesque creature burned into their minds, a traumatic experience, which they were sure they would never be able to forget. You were right. Naruto was hiding something, but I never thought it would be something like this. I don't know what it is exactly, but we can't trust him. We must notify the Hokage immediately. Who knows what this man is up to, this monster, said the blonde Yamanaka, almost screaming from the panic she felt, while the young Naruto watched them, being next to her. But the girl would stop talking when she noticed Sasuke's silence. She would approach him to ask him what was happening. However, her words died in her mouth when she saw what the Uchiha had in front of her. A large number of trees were surrounding something. Corpses. But they weren't just that, no. They were the corpses of a single person. Sasuke Uchiha. Dozens of them, all torn apart in completely horrific and inhuman ways, all of them being of varying ages, some children, some teenagers, some adults, and some elderly. There were even what could only be described as female versions of Sasuke, who were also torn apart like the rest. Ino felt her blood run cold at the grotesque scene. Her body had become completely static, while Sasuke had his eyes fixed on that pile of corpses. She couldn't see his expression, but she could tell he was just as or more disturbed than her by the way his body was shaking. All this while the little blonde boy watched them sadly, without saying a single word. They were paying so much attention to the corpses that they did not notice the sound of footsteps behind them. I found you. The trio's eyes widen in complete horror and fear as they hear that grotesque, monstrous voice behind them. Before they could even react, Sasuke and Ino are hit by the thing, sending them crashing into some trees. Groaning in pain, they open their eyes, only to be met with a peculiar sight. That monster was in front of the child Naruto, who had his gaze downcast, but both could still see the gleam of deep sadness in his eyes. I told you to stop bothering me. That abomination that life itself rejects would say, looking with what seemed to be anger and disapproval at the little blonde. I know. I'm sorry, the boy murmured regretfully, not having the courage to finish the sentence or even look at that creature, who would only let out a grunt of frustration and anger. It doesn't matter, just don't get in the way of my plans again, you've already caused me enough problems. The monster exclaimed, only receiving a silent nod from the young Naruto. To the complete horror of both young men, they saw how the large and bulky deformed body of that thing opened in a horrifying way, revealing an enormous amount of limbs, whether arms, tentacles, insect legs or pincers, all made of rotten flesh, which grabbed the small child with force, taking him inside. Letting both of them see how its grotesque jaws completely consumed the small infant. For a brief second, Sasuke could look into the eyes of the little boy, who looked back at him, and upon seeing him, he could only feel how in those blue eyes there was an enormous amount of guilt. And without further ado, that little boy disappeared into the grotesque, putrid jaws of that abomination straight from hell itself. Once the being completely consumed the little boy, his own grotesque appearance began to change. The sound of flesh tearing and bones breaking filled the ears of both young men, who saw that where that boy and the monster once were, there was now none other than Naruto Uzumaki. But this was the normal Naruto, the same Naruto who was in the real world taking a nap. Hello, Ino. Hello, Sasuke, the blonde-haired man spoke, giving both intruders a blank look, but also a small mocking smile, almost amused by the whole situation that was happening. But that smile was almost imperceptible, disappearing after a few seconds, only leaving his empty and monotonous expression as he watched those who were invading his mind. That stupid brat has been bothering me lately, what a busybody. But now I feel better, I thank you both for helping me capture him, he thanked them both, watching as they stood up and their expressions reflected nothing but fear towards him. Sasuke decided to swallow his fear, standing firmly in front of that human-shaped creature. What have you been doing all this time? Those people. It was always you, that dream. It wasn't a dream, it was a vision of what you had done, the black-haired man said, unable to prevent the nerves and fear from being noticed in his voice, despite his attempts to hide it. In less than a blink of an eye, Naruto was already in front of him, causing even more fear in the boy, who could only tremble at having that monster in front of him. What a shame, Naruto would say, letting out a sigh of disappointment, before putting on a sad smile among the variants. For a second I thought you were well done. What? Was the only thing the confused Uchiha could say. Suddenly, a large amount of roots emerged from the ground, binding the black-haired man with great force, to the point where they prevented him from moving, leaving him kneeling on the ground in front of the blonde. Sasuke the Yamanaka exclaimed worriedly, trying to go to his aid, only to find Naruto in front of her, before she could even take a step forward. You know, I was really hoping it would last longer than the others, the boy said calmly, but in his voice you could notice small traces of sadness, which he hid very well, to the point where the girl didn't notice. I'm going to tell everyone the truth. Everyone in Konoha will realize what a monster you've always been, Ino shouted at the top of her lungs, while small tears formed at the corners of her eyes. What can I say? This lasted much longer than I wanted, but nobody said being a creator was easy, were the words spoken by the blonde-haired man, while a small mocking smile appeared on his lips. See, creator? What is that supposed to mean? Who do you think you are, God? Ino was completely terrified by everything that was happening, beginning to back away as she saw Naruto approaching slowly. This was noticed by Sasuke, who tried to free himself from the roots, but this was completely in vain. He couldn't move even a single millimeter. Ino, react, you have to get us out of here, the Uchiha shouted at her, helpless and frustrated for not being able to do anything in that situation. Please don't call me that, it's very uncomfortable, said the blonde, getting closer and closer to the Yamanaka, while he had a mocking and ironic smile upon hearing that name, God. Don't come closer also, what is a variant? She asked, annoyed as she saw how that creature was making fun of her. It's an attempt to get someone back, but thanks to you and Sasuke, I'll have to make new ones, the blonde said vaguely, having a calm smile, but at the same time his voice denoted tiredness. Ino, don't let me distract you, Ino, Sasuke shouted at the top of his lungs, starting to get more and more desperate as he saw how the situation was getting worse with each second. But why? Why are you doing all this? It was the million-dollar question. They didn't even know exactly what Naruto was doing, but something that caused Ino even more intrigue and curiosity was why, the reason behind all this. I'll do whatever it takes to get back what I lost, Naruto replied with a smile. No. Ino, quick react. You are a monster. The blonde growled, looking with contempt at that monster who was disguised in human form. You can't reason with madness, was the only thing Naruto said, after having let out a sigh of disappointment at the Yamanaka's words. In a quick movement, he transformed his arm into a huge mass of rotting flesh, which launched itself at the blonde, extending its enormous, sharp claws, ready to tear her apart. But Ino didn't stay still. She reacted quickly, jumping and using that mass of flesh as a base to make another jump, only with much more momentum, managing to arrive right next to Sasuke. We're leaving now, I shouted, upset, making seals at high speed. Sasuke watched in horror as Naruto turned towards them, bringing his massive claws down on them, and just as they were just inches away from touching them. Ready. With that scream, a strong white light surrounded them both and blinded Naruto. That light even managed to illuminate that dark and desolate forest for a brief moment. Sasuke's eyes snapped open, his breathing extremely labored, his body sweating from the panic he felt, to the point where he could hear and feel his heart beating 1,000 times a second. Lucky, we managed to get out, he muttered, realizing that, indeed, they were no longer inside Naruto's mind. But the Uchiha realized something. How did I get here? He asked himself very nervously, seeing how he was inside what seemed to be the forest of death. He didn't understand how he had gotten to that place. However, his answer came quickly, when he saw a certain blonde a few meters away from him, with his back turned. That image only made the deepest primordial terror completely invade the black-haired man's mind, to the point where he began to tremble. I am such an idiot. I shouldn't have lowered my mental defenses. I was arrogant and overconfident. I never thought that a variant would have the idea of invading my mind. I don't know if you are very brave or very stupid. That being spoke in a very calm manner. Slowly, he turned around, revealing something simply horrible, and that was that half of Naruto's face was horribly disfigured, his jaw opened, showing enormous and grotesque jaws, his tongue turned into several tentacles that moved in the air, as if they had a life of their own, and where his eye used to be, there was a larger, slimy-looking tentacle. An extremely bizarre and disturbing sight. At that sight, Sasuke couldn't help but take a few steps back. His mind had gone blank from the immense fear he felt, as if what he had seen inside his mind hadn't been enough. To make matters worse, he saw a strange aura of a beautiful white color surrounding Naruto, that aura flowing upwards as if it were fire. At that, he could only close his eyes tightly, waiting for whatever that monster was going to do. But instead of something that was going to end his life, he only heard a phrase that left him extremely confused. Live your life, variant. Live it well. At those words, Sasuke opened his eyes, still afraid, only to see how that creature was shot out, flying towards the sky at such speed that it managed to disappear from his sight in less than 2 seconds. Once that thing left the forest, a deathly silence fell upon him. And immediately, the black-haired man remembered Ino, running quickly to look for her. After a few minutes, he found her near where they had been before, but she looked very calm, something extremely strange with how she had been inside Naruto's mind. Ino the Uchiha shouted, arriving next to the blonde. Huh! Oh, hey Sasuke, tell me, did you finally find what you wanted in Naruto's mind? Sorry, but I don't remember what happened, the blonde would say with a nervous smile. This left the Uchiha completely surprised, instantly realizing that this was Naruto's work. After that, there was nothing else. He simply told Ino that he had found what he wanted, and without further ado, he retired to his home, with the memories of that event engraved in his mind. When he returned home, he had a tired look, something that was instantly noticed by his parents. Sasuke, are you okay? His mother asked him. At this question, the black-haired man remained silent for a few seconds, before looking up and seeing his mother and father. I don't want to be a ninja anymore. Time passed. The day after that incident, he realized that no one remembered Naruto, not the Hokage, not the villagers, no one. It was as if all memory of him had disappeared from one second to the next, as if Naruto Uzumaki had never existed. The only thought left was that the Jinchuriki of Kyuubi was in that village, but no one knew who he was, and for some reason, no one bothered to find out or investigate his identity. Sasuke had made the decision to abandon his future as a shinobi. This had surprised his parents, especially Fugaku, who could not be more disappointed in his children because of this. However, the boy didn't care about this. He had made this decision because he simply wanted to do one thing, and that was to enjoy his life. That experience in Naruto's mind made him understand one thing. The end was near, and there was nothing he could do to prevent it. It had happened hundreds of times before, and this time would be no exception. So, he decided to dedicate himself to enjoying his life as much as he could. His brother supported him in his decision, which made him a little happy. But despite not being ninja, they both trained together, since they were aware that at any moment the village could be attacked and they had to know how to defend themselves. And it was a good thing they made that decision. A few years later, the village was attacked by a terrorist organization called Akatsuki, because they believed that the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi was in that village. Thanks to everyone's efforts, they had managed to defeat them. Their sensei Kakashi had died in battle, but not before taking with him a mysterious ninja with an orange spiral-shaped mask. And thanks to the combined work of Itachi, Tsunade, and many more elite ninjas, they had managed to assassinate the leader of said organization, called Pain. Thanks to the Sannin Jiraiya, they had discovered the location of his true body, managing to finish him off permanently. After that, they had to rebuild the village because of the damage caused in the battle. But after that, they were at peace for years. Itachi eventually had to take over as clan leader, but this was mostly a political issue, so he had no problem with it. Plus, he had ended up married to his girlfriend Izumi, something that made him very happy, you could tell. And as for Sasuke, well, he ended up becoming closer to Ino after that event. Over time they became friends, and then a couple, only for them to end up getting married over the years. Sasuke Uchiha's life was going pretty well. He had friends, a wife he loved, and time even blessed them with a beautiful daughter. Time went on and his daughter grew up to be a beautiful woman, who married and had her own family. And so it was, as Sasuke Uchiha grew old happily at his wife's side, until the inevitable happened. Lying in bed, surrounded by his family and friends, completely old and unable to move, Sasuke died peacefully and with a smile on his face, having the luxury of dying of old age, having enjoyed everything that life had to offer him. He had long since stopped caring about the whole vision he had when he was a child or what happened inside Naruto's mind. He was gone, and no one remembered him anymore, so it wasn't worth wasting time on that subject. So when he died, he had no regrets. His last thought before his heart stopped forever was that he had undoubtedly had a good life. The world would continue to spin without Sasuke. His death would not change anything, he would just be another one of the bunch. The years passed, and with them, new advances were achieved, among them, advances in technology. Little by little, machines were becoming more common, more complex artifacts that made people's lives easier. Kunais and shuriken were replaced by firearms, which combined with the control of chakra, gave much better results. New forms of entertainment for young people were emerging in the form of digital screens and games. These advances only advanced more and more with each passing year, until a point was reached where these advances would be so efficient that the use of chakra would be left aside, seeing it as something too inefficient compared to modern technologies. And so, as has happened before, the era of the ninjas would disappear, giving way to the modern era, the era of technology. The chakra, the invocations, the clans, all of that would be erased by the passage of time, to the point where all of that would be nothing more than a legend that would be told by future generations, about ninjas capable of controlling the elements of nature. Some of the buildings that remained intact would be seen as historical monuments and turned into tourist sites for the public, such as the remains of the deteriorating Mount Hokage. Large cities would rise on the former ninja villages. The Bijus? Nobody knows what happened to them. With the death of their Jinchurikis, they returned over time. Being masses of chakra, they could not die. They ended up resurrecting somewhere in the world. Most likely they decided to hide, taking advantage of their freedom, and the fact that chakra was being left aside, returning to their homes and remaining hidden from the sight of the new humans, becoming just another of the many legends. But there would also be wars, which would be much more destructive than before, since everyone would have extremely powerful weapons. It only took one action for a nuclear war to break out around the entire world. And with that, humanity became extinct. There was no miracle that saved them. They simply ended up killing each other, and the time of that race came to an end, leaving the planet Earth uninhabited by any form of intelligent life. Its oceans were polluted, its lands destroyed and filled with mountains of garbage, and its atmosphere filled with toxic gases. However, not everything is bad. Life always finds its way. The Earth does not need humanity, either to rebuild itself nor to survive. Humans need it. Slowly, timid, small vines would start to emerge from an old box, making their way with their own branches. Then, everywhere, small green spots would appear, some coming out of the same trash. It seemed that the land had eroded uncontrollably, with no return, but the opposite was being proven. Others of these same people managed to knock down entire towers of garbage and rubble. Others even took territory over the remains of buildings that humans had built. Plants, and with them, their cycle. Fungi, insects, organisms that survive on decomposition, cockroaches and flies begin to appear, increasing their numbers, devouring the garbage that remains, as well as other waste such as cardboard, rotten fabric, cotton, spoiled food. All organic waste was used by these creatures. Life had begun to rise up against garbage, pollution, and erosion. In this way, a cycle that was perfectly known to the Earth begins to change in the air. There is cleanliness, thanks to the plants, more oxygen, more breathable areas. Time goes by and organic waste has already served its purpose. Now it is the turn of the waste that is more difficult to disintegrate: plastics, paints, and all petroleum-based waste, which are beginning to disappear little by little. The same thing happens with the sea. It begins to clean itself. The waves begin to erode the rubbish, turning it into small stones, small grains of sand, from plastic to glass, grains which will form the new beaches. And so, after this hard battle, the Earth was detoxified. And after that, there are samples of the survivors. These are not lions, sharks, or any apex predators or herbivores, no. These are smaller beings, prepared for this type of situation, because in the food chain, it is not the strongest that survives, but the fittest. Like rodents or fish, animals that do not need so much oxygen or food to survive, intelligent enough to know how to differentiate plastic from food and resistant to the situation of their recovering planet. And so millions of years have passed. That planet that once seemed like a yellow and brown spot had now returned to its former beauty, a beautiful world of green and blue, denoting life in its pure state. The towers of garbage and debris have already disappeared, as well as the satellites that were in its atmosphere. The animals have evolved and managed to adapt to the new ecosystems that have returned to equilibrium and balance. The rivers, seas, and oceans are crystal clear, the air is clean. It is a new opportunity for life, as there are not only plants now, but also trees, giants of all shapes and sizes all over the world, giving the earth that characteristic green color. As for human civilization, only traces of metal and some debris remain, like small scars that show that there was once civilization on this planet. A civilization of a species that had completed its cycle, and that, like all species, was faced with extinction. But this wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either. This was something completely natural, beyond the concepts that humans had about good and evil. It was something simply inevitable. Everything that begins has an end. Everything that lives, at some point will die, and every race, at some point will become extinct, and that's not bad. It's just part of the very nature of the universe. Hundreds of years had passed since the planet Earth had been detoxified. It was a beautiful day on one of the many continents, until something strange happened. A strange light appeared in the sky. Even though it was daytime, the light was so intense that it could be seen very easily, to the point that it ended up attracting the attention of several animals. It was as if a star had fallen from the sky, a simply beautiful sight, but at the same time foreshadowing the end of everything. When that light touched the ground, in the middle of a huge and thick forest, it went out as if it were a candle, revealing the silhouette of something that had not inhabited that world in millions of years, a human being. But this wasn't just any human, it was Naruto Uzumaki, who looked exactly the same as when he left that world so long ago. The boy looked at the whole place with complete calm, not being impressed by the extinction of humanity. On the contrary, his eyes reflected a certain boredom, as if he had already seen such a scenario hundreds of times, being used to it. Without saying a single word, he began to walk towards a specific place. As he walked, all the animals that were on the planet shuddered just by his presence. They did not even have intelligence as such, they could not reason, but even so, their instincts warned them about the danger that had come to the planet. The animals around him had completely stopped. Whether predators or herbivores, they all looked at him with curiosity, some intimidated and some directly escaped. Ignoring the animals, Naruto just kept walking calmly, while the trees and plants in front of him moved aside, leaving the path open for him, as if the very nature of that planet was his loyal servant. After a few minutes of walking, the blonde arrived at his goal, a huge hill with a small mountain at the end. That place was nothing more than where the village of Konoha once stood, and that small mountain was all that remained of the Mount of the Hokage Faces. You could say that this field was the grave of the Konoha village. Naruto didn't say anything, he just stood completely still, looking at that place that was once his village, feeling the wind blowing and messing up his hair and the sun's rays hitting him fully, all while his face remained unchanged, showing an expression of complete calm and emptiness at the same time. But his eyes had a slight glint of nostalgia and sadness, emotions that he quickly hid. After a couple of minutes of complete silence, the blonde finally did something. He began to float, rising into the sky until he was over that field, the sunlight shining behind him, revealing only his silhouette. And at that moment, in the silence of the place, only a few words could be heard. Astral draft. And with that, everything was consumed by light. And nothing was left.
Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.